G'day, May 40 here. Such exciting times that we're in right now. How can I avoid streaming for hours and hours every day? So when Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, there was chaos. Did you know there was chaos when Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan? And I have abstained from trying to score petty political points against Joe Biden for the chaos that accompanied the Afghan withdrawal. My point was that the good that came out of the Afghan withdrawal, the righteousness of that move for the sake of American interests and perhaps even Afghan interests, completely outweighed the chaos that accompanied that withdrawal. And that's my attitude towards Elon Musk and DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Right? Yes, there's chaos. They're getting some things wrong. They're making mistakes. But overall, seems to me that they are doing the right thing, right? So, Washington Post here, Musk team kicks off federal layoffs as White House eyes big cuts. So, Trump's plan for shrinking the civilian workforce is coming increasingly into clear view. So, we have begun sweeping layoffs of federal employees. Trump is racing to shrink the government's civilian workforce, and widespread layoffs have begun, and they are overwhelming the Office of Personnel Management. Right, that's the HR department for the government. And the Office of Personnel Management, right, operated by Russ Vought, has begun to assert more control over all federal hiring. And the White House is eyeing cuts to agency budgets of between 30 and 40% on average across the government. Right, and this target is going to vary. So depending on which agencies are favored by President Trump, such as the Defense Department and Homeland Security. And late Wednesday, a federal judge lifted a pause on a deferred resignation program that would pay workers through September if they quit now. Now the administration says it will not accept new applications. So we've got an accelerating pace by Trump to cut back on the federal workforce. Where I strongly disagree with this plan is that there's not enough emphasis given to the great work that many federal employees are doing, and that overall you should treat your employees with as much respect as possible. So Tuesday, Trump signed an executive order telling agency heads to promptly undertake preparations to initiate large-scale reductions in force. So I think that automating more and more government services is a good idea. Using AI where appropriate to get productivity gains is a good idea. And we could not have gotten to this place without the dramatic increases in artificial intelligence that we've seen over the past 6 months. Right, so we're going to have probably the most substantial transformation of the federal workforce in decades, maybe ever. And Trump is going to have more power, and he is going to curtail many federal regulations. He's going to curtail many federal government workers and agencies that in his first term acted directly against his instructions. Now, much of this will end up in the courts, but I don't see how that is a constitutional crisis. All right, let's have this discussion in the courts. Let's have this fought out in the courts. Obviously, Trump won't win everything, and the Trump administration overwhelmingly has abided by court decisions. So we'll have a mess, all right? So we had all sorts of termination emails sent in error, and then there were retractions, and then people were laid off. So there is absolutely a mess, just like the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a mess. But if you're overall doing the right thing, I think that's what's most important, not if there's some chaos and mess. So many people at Veterans Affairs, so doctors, nurses, other medical professionals who were hired in recent weeks, now waiting final approval, and they cannot start their jobs. So I assume that there will be a reduction in the quality of medical services offered by the VA for a time, as long as the efficiency gains, right, outweigh the efficiency losses, right? I think that's the most important thing. So Musk's team has begun cutting staff by dismissing workers in their probationary periods, which usually last 1 or 2 years. And these people amount to about 7% of the government's civilian workforce of more than 2 million people. About 10% of the FBI's workforce is in its probationary period, 7% of the IRS. So all sorts of probationary employees have been terminated, particularly at the Department of Education. Now, the Clinton administration reduced the size of the federal workforce by nearly 400,000 people, and that resulted in the smallest federal workforce in 40 years. So these cuts came through layoffs, though also attrition. But the Trump administration is looking to eliminate whole offices, right? Particularly those carrying out diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. I think this is smart, all right? Focus on the DEI, and that's where you will get substantial amounts of inefficiency and corruption. Russell Vought, budget director, told Fox News the president can move forward unilaterally using the laws on the books to have staff reductions. Now, there are, of course, many legal challenges. Meanwhile, the administration is focusing on laying off workers, and they can probably make it happen. Right, this is rolling through right now. All right, Mark Halperin, yesterday evening.
That most of these, maybe all of them, are largely good for him politically in terms of getting stuff done. You may not like what he's doing, but you can observe it and recognize it for what it is, which is an asymmetrical advantage he has. As I say all the time, when one of the main ways I cover politics and government is to look for asymmetrical advantages that one side has over the other. Steve Almendorf, who's joining us again tonight, said one of the smartest things anyone said in these 25 days, the three A's that are propelling Donald Trump to some success. I bet, Steve, I'm predicting, I don't normally predict, that Steve's going to say Trump's not doing as well as he was the last time Steve was here. But attention, dominating the attention of the American people in the media, activity, not activities, activity one, I can't even remember now. It's attention, and it's, I'm like Rick Perry, -1. Steve's going to tell us what the three A's are. Action, thank you, not activity, action. And then the last one's authenticity. And you saw that yesterday with the Musk photo op. You saw it again today. Donald Trump is just, he's plain spoken, and people like that. If they have to choose between two political figures, one who acts like a politician and one who acts plain spoken, they like the plain spoken one. That's just like, I don't know if that's as old as time itself, but it's certainly been true in the last 50 years. They want their president kind of up on a pedestal, but they want their president up on a pedestal talking like a normal person. And Donald Trump has figured out a way to do that. So let's run through a few things that happened today. As I said, he talked to Attorney General today. Number 4, please. Filed suit against the New York Attorney General and the New York Governor and the New York Police Commissioner, a bunch of Democrats in New York. I don't quite understand the case yet. I got to go.
Massive fraud that's taken place. And then you have judges that are activists, and they sit there and they...
About which we speak here is President Trump spoke to Vladimir Putin today at a very long phone call, got readouts from both sides. Primary topic, at least as far as we understand it, was Ukraine, where there were very conciliatory things said on both sides, and where President Trump talked about the prospect that the two would meet soon. There's some discussion of meeting in the U.S. and Russia. Also, some conversation about meeting in Saudi Arabia. Please play number 10.
We're going to be meeting, actually tomorrow they're meeting in Munich, as you know, and we're going to have some other meetings, and I'll be dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect...
Look, the Ukraine war is effectively over. Right, that's the bottom line. The war in Ukraine is effectively over right now. There will be some minor skirmishes. There will be some chaos. Ukraine's not going to get everything that they want, but it's effective.
That he'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
All right. So this is a huge story. And it's where I want to start in talking about 4 areas of contrast. I'll talk about it one by one and bring in our guests. Talked about 4 areas of contrast where President Trump is different than Joe Biden. And I think in each of them you could argue for his own political benefit, better in terms of how he operates than Joe Biden. And this first one is how he deals with people like Putin. Okay. So you can debate, as many do, why it is that when Barack Obama was president, Putin took some of Ukraine, then took not a square inch of Ukraine while Donald Trump was president that we know of. And then when Joe Biden became president, he invaded Ukraine. We can debate why that happened. Donald Trump would have a point of view about that. I'm not really sure what Joe Biden's point of view on that would be on that, to be honest. But I know what Donald Trump would say. And then Joe Biden did an incredible job, in my view, and the view of many other people, in building a coalition to support Ukraine. Success, because he didn't let tanks roll through into Poland and down the Champs-Elysees. Success. But I don't think he can look at anything as a failure that he left office with the war still going on. All these people dying.
Okay, that was a ridiculous point. There was never a time where Vladimir Putin was even looking to take over all of Ukraine, let alone invade other countries such as Poland or roll into France. And so, yes, we gathered an international coalition to fight over Ukraine, but that we were placed in the position of having a war in Ukraine and then getting so deeply involved. That was an absolute disaster. So you can do things that sound impressive, such as building an international coalition, but they were an absolute disaster for American interests, for European interests, right, for Ukrainian interests. Absolute disaster. John Mearsheimer says it was 10 times the disaster of the unnecessary 2003 invasion of Iraq.
And massive problems in Ukraine with the government, with the military, with the nature of the destruction done to the country and to the people. And again, maybe Joe Biden, if reelected, or Kamala Harris, if elected.
Yes, I feel massively energized by this new Trump administration. His energy is contagious, right? I feel like Trump and I are on the same page on many things. And when you get on the same page and then you build something together, you get energized. So these are exciting times. So just like people on the left are largely dispirited, people on the right have every reason to feel excited.
Elected would have ended the war. But I think, again, there's reason to think, no, they weren't doing anything to end the war. And one thing they weren't doing is talking to Putin. Donald Trump, from the beginning of his time in national life, and even before he ran in 2015, has always said, I'll talk to anybody. I don't have this like moral high ground stance of, I'm not going to talk to the leader of Russia or the leader of China. Or if they do something we don't like, the Chinese shoot down a military plane or North Korea shoots some missiles. The reaction of a lot of people in the foreign policy world is, well, you can't talk to them. Got to not talk to them. And I think there was some thought, I've heard a lot of conversation about this. Before Donald Trump got reelected, people said, is it possible that Putin will never be in the community of nations again? For as long as he's alive and running Russia, the West can never let him back. I think that was a real possibility, but it's not. It's not for Donald Trump. For Donald Trump, it's like he'll talk to anybody. He will happily talk to anybody if he thinks it's in the interest of the United States to talk to them. And that's different. And again, I'm not saying he's going to end the war for.
So it's not just different. I think it's good. And I think it also applies to our life, right? There should be nobody that we are unwilling to talk to. There should be nobody who we can't look in the eye. And if there are people that you cannot look in the eye, that has to do with you. And that indicates that there's work that you need to do. So I was having a discussion with Elliot Blatt yesterday about forgiveness. And I was making the point that you can't just forgive something substantial, something that was terribly damaging and painful for you. You can't just skip straight to forgiveness. You have to process what happened. You have to mourn the loss. And you have to gain clarity over why it was so painful for you. And you have to gain clarity on what things tend to trigger your resentment. So for me, it is things that socially humiliate me, right? Something that dramatically reduces my social standing or it reduces my standing in the eyes of the people most important to me. That is the thing that is most likely to trigger resentment. And as I was saying this, Elliot would translate process into analysis. And so I would keep saying you have to process these emotions. You have to come to terms with the pain that you experienced and why it was so particularly painful for you, because the identical event for someone else may have been quite mild. But if you've experienced certain things that have been devastating, you have to gain clarity about why they were devastating, how they revived, right, pain from childhood and just put you in a whirlpool and just made the childhood pain all the more intense. So, for example, fear of abandonment was excited in me in childhood because I lived with so many different homes in my childhood, and then we moved frequently in my childhood, and so anything in adulthood that brings back my fear of abandonment, such as loss of a relationship, a friendship, a community, a job, a solid base where I felt like I'd made a home. Anything that threatens that just revives my childhood fears of abandonment. And these fears of abandonment not only have not diminished over time, they've become more intense. So as I was talking about processing these things, Elliot kept translating it into analysis. And no, analysis is not the same as process. Process means that you make progress, that you move through certain stages. So stage one is naming what happened, naming the perpetrator, whether it's an institution, an idea, or an individual. So once you name the perpetrator of your cause of resentment, right, your resentment will already begin to diminish. Then when you name what exactly was done to you that caused the resentment, you will experience a further reduction in resentment. So it's not the entire person who you're really resenting. It's not an entire institution. It is one manifestation of that individual or institution. And so you get a second reduction in resentment. Third, you have to get clarity on why this was so painful for you, right? Was it a threat to your social status? Was it a threat to your survival, perhaps your economic or your physical survival? Was it a threat to your love life? Was it a threat to your sense of competency or self-esteem? So you have to identify where specifically you were harmed and threatened. And then next step is, what role did I play in this event that's caused me to feel so much resentment? And then next step is, how could I have acted differently? So each step that you go through, you should experience a substantial reduction in resentment. And that's process. Now, analysis is not the same as process, right? You can replay the harm that was done to you, and that's not going to get you any closer to healing, right? You can analyze these things to death. That's not going to bring you any closer to healing. You have to process them by moving through the stages of clarifying who did it, what was done, how it affected you, what role you played, how you could have acted differently going forward. And so that's a process. You make progress, you move through it, and you know that you have processed something when you can talk about it with equilibrium. So how often do I talk about painful things in my life where my voice cracks, I start crying, you see ripples of weird interfering tension patterns like flow through my face and my neck and my back and my shoulders, right? Not very often. So if I can talk about things in a calm tone without having all these weird interfering tension patterns, that indicates that I have processed the events. If I can't talk about them without my voice cracking, that indicates that I have not processed. So process, very different from analysis.
For sure. But it seems like he might, and it doesn't seem like Joe Biden was ending the war. Now joining us from the Council on Foreign Relations, two extreme experts on foreign policy. They're not. They're experts on politics. Naive. What do you think?
I think as we've talked before, I think one of his great attributes is his willingness to go outside the conventional wisdom and outside the norms. And that's part of his authenticity. That's part of how he gets attention, my 3 A's, and that's part of how he takes action. And I don't have a problem with that. I think the question is, what is he saying to Putin, and what's the deal they're potentially going to put together? The substance of it will ultimately matter. I do think one of the advantages that Trump has over Democrats, and it comes to the back in the campaign, the certain things he did that our candidates were unwilling to do, is he's willing to go do things, and people like that. And so I don't have a problem with that. But I will have a problem if he cuts a bad deal.
Right. So there's already speculation about that, Matt. People are saying he's going to give away too much land. He's going to undermine Zelensky. And again, of course, a good deal is better than a bad deal. But Matt, some people say in Trump's world, we just need a deal. Like, the war's got to end. And Putin has a lot of leverage. And so if it's not a deal that the Council on Foreign Relations loves, whatever, the American people just want the war over. And Europe wants the war over. What say you, foreign policy savant, Matt Gorman?
Yeah, look, there's going to be a huge part of the Democratic Party, and maybe some of the Republicans, who won't like any deal that comes out of this. So that's just that's baseline, right? They will not like, in essence, that we're even doing this. And so that will be part and parcel of what's going on. I just go back to the fact that Trump just wants to sell a deal, right? Like, he wants in every aspect: Ukraine and Russia, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, Gaza. Like, get in a room. He's supremely confident in his ability to figure out a way for both sides to leave the room, and then that's his job to sell it, and he will. And again, I thought, like, the prisoner swap was, I thought, really smart, and more importantly, intimating in that where they didn't release who they gave away right away, into Russia, whatever. Yeah. Finance guy. So I think, he's going to have people that say he gave away the store no matter what. But I think he just wants this off the table and be able to sell it.
All right, here's the second thing that I would argue Trump is doing better than Biden. It's using the White House press secretary slot to go on offense. Okay, the Biden press secretaries, their job seemed to be don't make any mistakes, deflect, get through the briefing, hope there are no bad headlines, clean up where necessary. But this press.
Okay, let's check in with Halperin's show live this morning.
What we talk about today. Did you eat a particularly good croissant? Just anything. Share.
I think croissants and expressos are more Dan's lane. I'm a Biden. You would literally be having a coronary right now if that were true.
Yes, true about the Trump people. They are having trouble keeping up with it.
Can you imagine though, under that gauntlet, if you worked for Biden, you would literally be having a coronary right now if that were true.
Yes, good call. I like the double or triple entendre of that. Here's the daybook, folks. The President of the United States, his fourth press conference. Then they have four in less than a month, but I don't think so. And today's includes not just the welcoming ceremony at 4 o'clock. After, by the way, the president signs more executive orders at 1, including maybe on tariffs. 4 o'clock, he greets him. And then at 4:05, they have a bilat with a photo op where he will answer more questions in that photo op than most presidents, the previous president, would answer in a press conference. Then they have a press conference scheduled for 5:10. I doubt it will start on time, which means there's extreme peril for those who meticulously program two-way tonight, because this thing could be going on during our show, in which case we'll probably take it live. And then at 5:40, so the press conference is scheduled for 30 minutes, which would mean maybe more than 2 and 2. We don't know how many questions they'll take. And then at 5:40, they're having dinner in the state dining room. Unfortunately, that's closed press because I'd be super curious to be able to watch that. That's the President's Day, so he'll make a ton of news.
By the way, talk about a Valentine's Day gift. What Modi is going to bring the president in terms of tariff reductions should warm his heart.
Yes, it's going to be another template for a leader who comes in, building on the Japanese example. Come on bended knee, say, here, Mr. President, is this enough, or do I need to do more for you to keep from destroying my nation?
Oh, so I think this is like 2017 with the Saudis. You have a nice shiny sword. You flatter them. You throw.
No, he's going to give them more than that.
No. They're notorious for their tariffs. So the president knows that.
Yeah, just wait and see 2 years from now if it's real.
Every time the president goes into a meeting with the head of state, head of government, he has a sheet of paper that shows the trade deficit and the trade deficit on autos. And that frames his whole sensibility. So, again, John Trump, regardless of what Musk or anyone else does today, he's going to make a ton.
So Australia is one of those rare countries where the United States has a substantial trade surplus.
The news, signing executive orders, Mr. Scharf, who's now America's Rat Robin or Friar Tuck, whatever he is. Ton of news with the executive order signing, ton of news with the press conference and the photo op, so stay tuned for that. The vice president just landed in Munich, also known as Munchen. He's going to that Munich Security Conference, a big continuation of his tour, meeting world leaders on the national stage. He was earlier today in Poland at Dachau, commemorating the concentration camps. And in Munich, he's expected to meet, amongst other things, with Vladimir Zelensky, along with Secretary of State Rubio. So you have Rubio, the vice president, and the Secretary of Defense all in Europe, moving big chess pieces around in a very coordinated way. On Capitol Hill, the House at 10 o'clock marks up the budget.
Okay, Colin Liddell tweets, America right now is a weird version of the Emperor's New Clothes, with everybody around Orange Hitler being too terrified to challenge his delusions and erratic behavior. Many of them are simply waiting for the first big bump in the road before saying, actually, Mr. President, I think you are totally unhinged. Another analogy is Julius Caesar before the Ides of March, with senators, oligarchs kowtowing to the blonde baboon while nursing daggers in their togas. Should be fun watching all this play out.
Solution. We'll see where that goes. We'll talk about that in a moment. Hakeem Jeffries' press conference at 11. Senate side, lots going on with confirmation. The Trump cabinet is about to be fully stocked or close to it. Not quite full, but close to it. Judiciary votes on Kash Patel at 9. He will not get any Democratic votes. I predict that because I'm going out on a limb. 10 o'clock, Linda McMahon.
Hey, Mark, real quick, can I just, before we gloss over it, I will just say, flashback a month ago, once Kash is done, outside of potentially the labor secretary, which is more Republican issues, Trump's going to have gotten everything you want, every one of these people through.
As Tom Cotton predicted.
But the RFK one, you've gotten potentially McConnell as a problem, but both McCursky and Collins are on board with this. This is a huge coup for Trump.
It is a huge deal, and is because of the technical proficiency of the Sherpas, because of Donald Trump's control of the party and the performance of the nominees.
Well, Help Committee. Matt Gaetz went down, and that I think was the one sacrifice. Well, it was the one sacrifice to the gods. And I think then everyone else had to get through, because if he didn't and he had two go down, it would have been a real sign of weakness.
Well, if that's true, it might have been a huge decoy. Pretend to want Matt Gaetz, withdraw him, and then demand everybody else.
It is extraordinary that Donald Trump's outrageous nominees seem to be all getting through. And so I loathe all of Trump's nominees for key health positions, but part of me is glad that they're getting through, in the sense that it shows that Donald Trump still has momentum. It's interesting how Donald Trump is going about international affairs in a completely new way. So Wall Street Journal remarks, Trump writes a new playbook for quagmires in Gaza and Ukraine. Now, if Trump's new moves energize jihadi terror against Americans, then obviously that is on Donald Trump. On the other hand, trying to do things in a new way, right, after doing things that haven't worked for decades, maybe that's great. So Donald Trump is rejecting decades of U.S. policy, rewriting the accepted playbook for solving the world's intractable conflicts. He seems to already have a formula for settling the Ukraine war by making some concessions to Russia. He seems to be crushing hopes for a Palestinian state. He wants to resettle Gaza's entire population. So Washington, D.C.'s conventional answers to interminable clashes that have been tried and failed, well, Trump is doing something different. So he has a great power of belief in his own persuasion abilities, right? So yeah, some of this comes out of ego. He wants to be seen as a deal-cutting peacemaker of historic significance. He has a penchant for imposing on weaker countries, including allies, and he wants world peace. He wants quiet. He wants deals. He wants less American risk overseas. And will Trump try this game plan in Taiwan? So in Taiwan, there are fears that the president's desire for a quick trade deal with Beijing might inspire him to use Taiwan as a bargaining chip. Given that Taiwan is putting forward such mediocre efforts to defend itself, I give Trump perhaps the benefit of the doubt here. If Taiwan was more formidably preparing for invasion, that would be a different thing. So Trump talked to Putin. We seem to have the parameters of a peace deal. Now, Europeans say Trump always speaks about peace through strength, but we haven't seen the strength part yet. Trump surrendering too much for this peace deal. Trump wants a ceasefire, and this is going to sideline the Ukraine issue. His vision differs radically from Putin's. For Putin, a real solution means a Ukraine that is friendly to Russia. I don't really care if Ukraine is friendly to Russia. It makes sense to me that those parts of Ukraine that predominantly speak Russian as their first language, they belong with Russia. And those parts of Ukraine that do not primarily speak Russian as their first language, they do not belong with Russia. China has got America where it wants it, isolated and friendless. America is not isolated. America is not friendless. America still has powerful alliances. I am concerned that Donald Trump treats our alliances with insufficient respect. Right? China is the country with almost no alliances and no friends. So in 2020, Trump bucked Washington's establishment by striking a peace accord with the Taliban that did not include the U.S.-backed Kabul government. I think this was the correct thing, right? The Taliban. Let's say the Taliban are 80% unpopular in Afghanistan, but those 20% who support the Taliban are willing to sacrifice. They are so dedicated and effective that they are going to run the country. And just like the mullahs in Iran, the 20% of the country who supports them are so dedicated and effective that the 80% who hate them simply don't matter much. Now, Trump is also talking about seizing the Panama Canal, making Canada part of the United States, and taking control of Greenland. Right? Just nothing that we've ever seen before. And if we destroy our alliances, if Trump creates so much instability and chaos that businesses are alarmed, and there seems to be considerable evidence of this, then it may well be that the amount of chaos kicked up by Donald Trump is doing the United States far more harm than good. Right? For decades, Washington has been Taiwan's most important backer, supplying it with weapons. But Taiwan is not exactly creating a formidable defense for themselves. So if the Taiwanese are unwilling to defend themselves, then why should we risk American lives?
Could be. Linda McMahon, Secretary of Education nominee, her first hearing before HELP at 10. 12:30, Chris Murphy and Arnie Duncan hold a press conference bracketing on Linda McMahon. That press conference will strike fear in the hearts of the White House. Floor votes today. RFK will be confirmed, whether he gets 53 votes, 52, 51. We'll see, maybe more. Some Democrats still might vote for him. Brooke Rollins then will be her floor action on her nomination, and then they're going to start moving on Lutnick and Loeffler. According to Politico Pro, and just to be clear, when I'm citing them, I didn't pay a dime for it. They put some of their content online for free. I don't know why. Maybe it enticed me to give them 10 grand. Politico Pro says that Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan, two of America's leading bank CEOs, are on Capitol Hill today at a roundtable hosted by Tim Scott on debanking, a topic we have discussed here. All right, guys, here we go. Let's try to do this rapid because I want to get a lot of questions in today because I already see a lot of hands up. Please raise your hand if you want to be part of the conversation. Sean, where are we now in the Senate versus House Republican-only action on reconciliation? Will the House Budget Committee, for instance, pass the blueprint? And is either side going to blink, or are we just going to proceed on parallel tracks where the Senate pretends it's two bills and the House pretends it's one?
So there's an interesting dynamic. I had Ben Klein on my show last night, Congressman from Virginia. He's a Freedom Caucus member, a budget committee member, and an appropriator, which is sort of, you don't generally get those three at once. And he said, I'd be happy with two, but the real savings are on the one bill because of how anyway. I don't want to get into that, but the bottom line is it's a much more conservative approach. I just don't think these guys have been selling it well. And that's where Johnson and his team should be going out there and making a much more. They are getting much. If you are a conservative that wants to see government spending reduced, the one bill approach is much better at this. The key today is right now they've already probably lost 2 votes on the budget committee. They can't lose more than 3. Jody Arrington, the chair, knows his. I mean, like, you don't bring it up in committee without, you don't have your business meeting if you don't know that. They're going ahead with the meeting today if it's still.
So are we in a constitutional crisis? This is the main talking point in the mainstream media, among many legal experts and on the left. So it's an extension of the critique that Donald Trump is a dictator. But it's really a departure from that critique, because if Donald Trump is a dictator, then we're not in a constitutional crisis, right? The constitutional crisis has been solved. So Wall Street Journal, I think, has some common sense here. So many of Donald Trump's domestic policy decisions fall into 3 categories. Some rest on strong legal ground, others are legally debatable, and others, it appears that Donald Trump is breaking the law to deliberately tee up cases that will go to the Supreme Court to restore what he considers to be constitutional norms. None of these things is a constitutional crisis. So the administration's decision to pause discretionary spending to ensure that it complies with presidential priorities, right, that seems to be on pretty strong constitutional ground. Government unions challenging Donald Trump, but he should be able to win here. Second category decisions are more debatable legal grounds, such as dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the U.S. Agency for International Development and possibly the Department of Education. And then other places, Donald Trump is stretching the law to see what he can get away with, but so have many other presidents, such as Barack Obama and Joe Biden. So Barack Obama would taunt House Republicans saying, "So sue me," when he issued many of his executive orders. Joe Biden regularly exceeded his power by canceling student loans, mandating vaccines, and banning evictions. And after the Supreme Court blocked his first student loan write-off, he declared, "That didn't stop me," and used other illegal means. So Donald Trump may be wrong in some things, but there is no constitutional crisis as these cases make their ways through the court. The liberals are beating up on a recent tweet by J.D. Vance that judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. But the key word there is legitimate, right? Legitimate power, all right? The court cannot block the president's legitimate power.
Delayed, that's a problem. If they go forward with it, because the number gets out there right away. So once it happens and you start the train going down the track, it's a little hard to push it back into the station. If they start that means they have the votes. They'll get it to the floor. And then, right now you lose 2 on the budget committee. You're not picking them back up on the floor. You got 1 more to give. I think it's tough, but.
Well, so who has the upper hand? Are we headed towards 1 bill or 2? I mean, is the Senate going to back down?
Look, and here's why this is a bit of a ridiculous. So if the House passes it, and even if Lindsey Graham passes his, it goes to conference. So you have
There's no such thing as a conference. There's no conferences anymore.
Yes, there will be.
You think there'll be like an old-fashioned conference?
Yeah, they have to. You can't have.
Well, one side could back down, and they could go past the other side's bill.
No, or you could. I mean, in theory, not to get wonky, you can deem it on the floor, deem your 302A number, and then just work off of that for the appropriators. But they're never going to do that. So they will go to conference, and then the question is, where does it go from there? But I think that's where this thing heads. Is the reason I say that, Mark, is the argument that Johnson's going to make to his members is procedural. Guys, just get it out, and then we'll fight it with the Senate. But if we don't get to the Senate, they'll roll us. So that's the play right now internally. Get it, pass it. We'll fight with Lindsey Graham. We'll get the president on our side. But if we don't have a bill that we've passed, we have no negotiating power. So he's got to make a procedural argument to his members. I get it. We'll fight this out with the Senate, but they'll roll us if we don't do this.
Dan, hold on one second. Dad, sorry to interrupt your breakfast, but my father used to be a lobbyist. He knows a ton about House and Senate procedure. What do you think of what Sean just said?
Well, I think it's right. There will be a conference and there won't be a conference. It's not going to be the old-fashioned conference where you sit out in public and actually negotiate. I've seen conferences.
Those don't exist. Those don't exist.
I don't think there's been one of those in 10 years. But they formally have to have something called the conference if they want to come back to the floor with a conference report, which has priority on the floor in both houses. So there's an advantage of doing a formal conference.
So what do you think will actually happen, Dan?
I don't have any idea.
All right, that's the right answer. Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to back up. There's no such thing as a real conference. They haven't had one in years. Thank you, Dad. Come back.
Can I phone a friend?
Sure. I got backup. Dan, what do you think is going to happen? Is the House going to cave? The Senate? Is it going to, I mean, are they headed? They're wasting time because now you've got one body doing one bill and one body doing two bills. At some point, somebody's going to have to fold. So where do you think this is headed?
House folds, Senate goes. They want points on the board. And there was freak out yesterday when the budget they put out called for $880 billion in healthcare cuts. And you had a lot of Republicans in not just swing states, but states that receive a lot of federal money say WTF.
Correct. But I actually give them credit for coming up with something that has a chance to pass. I didn't think they could get to this point. It may not, but it actually has a chance. I think they squared a lot of the circles pretty well. All right.
Well, yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a statement, not a bill, but yes. Okay.
No, I understand. But they had to move to the next phase with something that could get enough votes. So there's still this question of how involved the White House is. As we all know, the president has been, agnostic and saying one bill, two bills, I don't care. But he's leaned into one beautiful bill. Politico, in a story yesterday, please put up 101, reported this. Vance, Stephen Miller, and Russ Vought are among those in the administration pushing for two bills. Scott Bessent wants one. Now, I don't know if this reporting is true, but let's say it is. Sean, it seems to me this is a kind of quote unquote leak you don't normally see in this administration. We know very little about divisions or about who's for what. So is that kind of an aberration or maybe not accurate? Or do you think there's something to that if it's true? Not about the position on the bill, but I mean, about the first term. But this is the first thing I've seen like this.
Yeah, but I mean, if you watch season one, it happened in every episode.
Right. But do you think this is a sign of like I'm sure there are divisions on Ukraine. I'm sure there are divisions on some aspects of DOGE. So is this the sign that people are now going to go to the media, including dreaded Politico, when they disagree?
Yeah, I think it's a great question you're asking. I just don't know. I mean, this is the first sign, as you've noted, that we're seeing. So is this going to become a recurrence? Will we play this out in the media? Or is this just good reporting? I mean, look, one of the things about Trump is...
Okay, Colin Liddell is weighing in the chat. He says, everybody hates America. NATO is gone. China's got America where it wants it, isolated and friendless. Eggs are going to keep going up. Trump is cooked. I was right predicting Trump would be a one-term president in 2016. My next prediction is he won't even get to one term this time around. Trump's kicking up too much dark energy for a midwit failed businessman, a mediocre con man to safely ride for 4 years. So you are not reassessing your views of Donald Trump based on his first 3 weeks of this new administration. So I am reassessing. It appears to me that Trump is more formidable this time around, more organized, and a better and more effective executive. And it appears to me that Donald Trump learned a great deal from his first term, that he was steadily becoming more effective, particularly by 2020 in his first term. All right, here are some of my bookmarks. Donald Trump Jr. is investing in the steroid Olympics. And here's a clip. Pod Save America, Obama bros admit that DOGE is a massive Trump win. We tried to reorganize the government. We tried to find efficiency. It's hard to do. Some of this is pretty annoying because it's the stuff that we should have done. Key.
And also, as much as I want to throw all of Trump's campaign promises in his face, like the price of eggs is not down, you have not ended the war in Ukraine, et cetera, he said he'd do it in 24 hours. I think most voters get that it was a shtick and they're going to give him some time to actually get things done.
Trump is he is moving so fast. They are doing a lot. It is not just the perception of it. They hit the ground running in a serious way. It's like genuinely impressive in a dark and sinister way, but it's nonetheless impressive. And if you're turning on the news every day and hearing about all these different things Trump is doing and all the different criticisms coming out of it, you may not like all of it, but like in comparison to how people felt about Joe Biden being basically absent, I imagine for a lot of people, it's a welcome change.
The energy, and he's signing things, and he's affecting all that. I think that is playing extraordinarily well.
It's like you don't want to seem like you're opposed to government efficiency, but obviously now they're just rampaging through like the government Venmo and shutting shit off left and right.
I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just lamenting our situation.
Me too. No, I love it. I felt the same way because I've seen the messaging memos, and it's like, you know, the young people, Gen Z, they like Doge and what Elon's doing because, you know, they see government as sclerotic and inefficient, and they like the move fast and break things ethos, and they want to get stuff done, and they like the results. And it's like, yeah, yes, of course, we all want that. We all know that government is slow. We all know that government can be inefficient. We all know that the bureaucracy can be bloated. We all worked in the fucking White House. We tried to reorganize the government. We tried to find efficiency. It's hard to do.
And honestly, some of this is pretty annoying because it's some of the stuff we should have done.
Right, yeah.
Like, you know, you could do some of this.
You just got to talk Gen Z to him. You're like, I could dig these Doja Cats. Okay?
Oh, my God. That was horrible.
Oh, no.
Okay, Maxine Waters is not happy.
People of this country are being violated because all of our privacy is being taken up by Elon Musk and Trump, and we don't know what all they have on us. We don't know what all they have on us.
Okay, that's pretty good.
People of this country are being...
And Colin Liddell says, my take is based on how Trump has hit the ground running. I agree with some of Trump's goals. I just don't think he's smart enough to ride the chaos that he is unleashing. Well, Donald Trump seems to do better in chaos than anyone I can think of. Just another sign of the vibe shift. Google Calendar has removed key cultural events from their site, including Pride Month, Gay Pride Month, Black History Month, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Jewish Heritage Day, Hispanic Heritage, Indigenous Peoples Month. And Clay Travis says, can we get a white excellence tweet, right? For the first time in about 20 years, we have a starting white cornerback in the NFL. He had an interception during the Super Bowl, returned it for a touchdown. So if we can't have a white excellence tweet of Cooper DeJean during Super Bowl pick 6, if not, why not? This constant identity politics BS is overwhelmingly rejected by sports fans of all races. It is why your brand is such garbage.
That he actually encourages this. He wants to hear both sides and kind of. So this is healthy and good. The question is it being weaponized? So are some of the internal saying, hey, are we doing this because we're trying to win him over? Honestly, though, he's not like a big consumer of Politico. So I don't think that this might just be, frankly, the views of some of these folks. And I also, based on some of the other leaks that I've seen in the last 3 days, don't necessarily agree entirely that it has to be accurate. I
agree, but it's something to watch. Dan, what are your thoughts on if this is something that the White House comms operation is going to be like, everybody go back to your lanes and stop leaking, or an aberration, or what?
I'd like to hear that.
It's also not the first time, because when the spending freeze happened, there was somebody leaked that a bunch of people were caught off guard.
But the difference with that one was it was all anonymous. It just said.
Does the Chrome browser suddenly start sucking for you? It's really been slow and yucky to use for past 2 months, past 6 weeks. Just like a significant deterioration in quality. So we got a Navy fighter jet here crashing into San Diego Harbor. That's not ideal. All right, I was listening to Hugh Hewitt yesterday. He said he can't afford a subscription to the Financial Times. He was half joking, but it is not cheap, right? It costs me something like $188 a year. So I pay 50 cents a day to subscribe to the Financial Times, and I don't have investments. So looking at the top of the Financial Times right now, Europe reels after Donald Trump announces U.S.-Russia talks on Ukraine. Germany criticizes America for making public concessions to Putin before negotiations have even begun. Why is Europe so concerned? They fear they will have to bear the cost of post-war security and reconstruction. It appears right now that Donald Trump has settled the Ukraine war. Right? We seem to have a framework for ending this war. And Europeans expect Trump to tell them that they must pay for Ukraine's reconstruction and they must deploy troops there to maintain a peace deal. The Americans don't see a role for Europe in the big geopolitical questions related to the war. Trump sees us as money, and Europe is reeling. Okay, that's pretty funny. So it appears that Donald Trump has unilaterally ended the war in Ukraine with a phone conversation with Vladimir Putin. South Africa has been blindsided by Donald Trump. So Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social that South Africa was confiscating land from white people, treating certain classes of people very badly, that South Africa's leadership was doing terrible things, horrible things, before signing an executive order freezing aid to the country. Then Trump's barrage was followed by a post on X from Elon Musk. And he's saying he is delaying bringing Starlink satellite internet service to his native South Africa because of the clumsy black empowerment legislation taking white farmers' land. South Africa has been blindsided. Its government, you will not be shocked to learn, has been failing. It is corrupt. Its government has lost a great deal of support. And South Africa has led the way in attacking Israel since October 7. And the South African government is appropriating land from white South Africans. And they're not happy, the South African government.
Some aides didn't like it. This is names. And again, I hope I'm not under-explaining this, but that is much more significant to say the Treasury Secretary and the head of the OMB differ on a big issue. This is not a little issue. They differ on a big issue. So you're right. You're right. The thing you cited, which showed up in several news organizations reporting, that was significant because it showed, a little bit of dissent. But this to me is a horse of a different color.
Yeah, and I think it matches with the fact that Stephen Miller's biggest focus has always been immigration. J.D. Vance is very sensitive to the base. He is very attuned to what they want. Immigration, and then I think energy, they want energy because they want to be able to point to something to say, we're doing something to try to bring prices down and juice the economy. Because everything else right now is not really focused on the economy. Scott Bessent is concerned about the tax bill. That is in his lane. And that is going to be very hard, as Congressman, what's his name, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee from Missouri, Jason Smith, has said. That bill as a standalone is very, very hard to get through the Republican House. So I think everyone is pushing for their equities, and it doesn't surprise me.
Great point. Great point. For lobbyists watching this program, many do. Tell your clients it's going to be 2 bills.
And I think, look, I go back to Trump. Trump is the chairman, not the CEO. He does not want to get involved in the day-to-day management.
Yeah. All right. In the news today, there's tons
Dan,
going.
if you put your lobbyist hat back on, to Mark's point, would you rather want 2 bills to be able to I mean, to me, if I were a lobbyist, I'd want to be able to tell clients we got 2 shots. You can keep moving them.
Correct.
Well, it 100%. Just depends. It depends what I'm lobbying for. But if my company has the tax bill, I'd start to. I mean, I think a tax bill will go through because they can't let this all expire. So know that there'll be something. The question is how much can get shoved into it, and the offsets. I have a hard time seeing them not do anything. So
yeah. I want a client. I want a billionaire owner of a sports team as a client because I want to be on the clock all year, warding off Trump's threatened bill to remove tax breaks.
A private equity person who owns a sports team.
That would be the best.
Really?
That is Hunter Biden Burisma level retainer. If you had that
your college kids, your kids are going to college this year for that.
All right, lots of international stuff in the news today. Let me tick off some of it. There's the meeting with Modi. There's the aftermath of Trump's conversation with Putin. There's the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State in Europe, and Europe's freak out over everything related to Trump. There's talk that I've heard and I've talked about on two-way before that Taiwan is somehow in play. I still don't quite understand what that's about. There's reporting in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal about Israel poised to go after Iran. There's Egypt now, just as Trump had hoped. There's Egypt now saying, "Hey, Trump's plan's horrible. Why don't we rebuild Gaza?" So there's lots going on internationally. Dan, what international player or players are obstacles for Trump now? Who is not bending to Trump's will that the administration has to worry about?
I think in the Middle East, the question is, are they trying to delay and kind of run this out a little bit versus really confronting and trying to solve the problem?
Criminal cartels under our criminal code as terrorist organizations. That's going to change the way with which we can deal with money flows, with laundering, following their cash.
Rousseau plans to travel to Washington next week with hopes of meeting with his counterparts there, including border czar Tom Homan. Bill, back to you.
All right, Molly. Pretty day there.
It looks like fake snow, but it's not.
That's right. It's not manufactured. You are in the Great White North. Thanks, Molly. Nice to see you there.
Cooperate with a federal government that seeks to erase and minimize and kill you.
I do not want to be here. It's my day off. I don't want to spend an hour applying glitter on my face so that you will hear and see me.
Emotions running high at a city council meeting in Worcester, Massachusetts, as the town leaders are approving a resolution to become a sanctuary city just for transgender people. Let's bring in Noah Rothman and Kennedy. I want to show you a little bit more of this, okay? Just a little bit more for everybody at home. Watch.
If you say that you're afraid of Trump and that's why you don't want the city to be a safe space for trans people, you better prepare for trans people to make this a very unsafe space.
I'm shaking right now. I don't want to be here. I'm sorry, am I taking too long pleading for my life?
Kennedy, I gotta go to you and say, what do you think of all this?
What a gift. I didn't think that we would see tape like that this morning. Sure. My only hope for Worcester is that the fun drag queens go there and not the drama queens, because just watching that city council meeting, I know it lasted for several hours, that must have been absolutely exhausting. It's like, I don't want people to look at me. It reminds me of that Meghan and Harry episode of South Park where they're like, when did our privacy? Where's our privacy? And they're outside playing drums with like neon signs. Yeah, so go ahead and make it a safe space. Just make it a fun space, and then, you know, go away.
It is a cause that the left is grabbing on too quickly. If you look at some of the rallies over the past week, now, what do you think of this?
Yeah, but it's just silly. I mean, they're borrowing from the concept of the sanctuary city, right, which is shielding illegal immigrants from law enforcement, federal law enforcement. At least that has the virtue of being seditious. This is just goofball stuff. No one is coming after you. There's no constabulary trying to drag you into some sort of a detention facility because you identify as trans or have gone through some sort of a therapy. Well, I'm not even sure what the claim here is, save for the fact that they want to be very dramatic and theatrical, and that is the sort of thing that does attract attention, and that gets them, you know, the small dollar donations and Democratic support. But
okay, constitutional dictatorship, not a contradiction in terms, right? The President of the United States can be a constitutional dictator in that he is effectively insulated from hindrance and accountability with regard to certain issues. This is an essay published in Minnesota Law Review by 2 Yale law professors back in 2010. So with regard to foreign affairs, the President of the United States essentially has all the same power as King George III at the end of the 18th century, King George III of England. So the modern administrative state offers many opportunities in the domestic sphere as well to deal with economic meltdowns, health crises, floods, fires, and other domestic disasters. So here's another example about the constitutional dictatorial power of government. Every county in California has a public health officer who can close down any business, can enter any home if necessary to deal with a health emergency. So that's just the public county health officer, right, with each California county. So just imagine the powers that the President of the United States has. So our best example of a constitutional dictator American president was Abraham Lincoln. Right, he dealt with a civil war that was both a military question and a domestic emergency. Right, by the time he took the oath of office on March 4, 1861, several states had already seceded, joined by several more after the firing on Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861. Nevertheless, Lincoln delayed calling Congress into session until July 4. So these 11 weeks between the fall of Sumter and July 1861 constitute perhaps the most interesting single episode in the history of constitutional dictatorship. Right, one man was the government of the United States. Right, he goaded the South into the war by resupplying Fort Sumter. He unilaterally decided to initiate a legally debatable blockade of all southern ports. He suspended habeas corpus, meaning that you could arrest people and you didn't have to tell them on what basis. And he said, well, Congress is away, somebody has to make decisions, and he was the person to do it. He argued he acted only to save the republic. He wasn't founding a new regime. and his actions, even if they appeared illegal, were all calculated to save the republic. Are all laws but one to go unexecuted and the government to go into pieces, lest that one law be violated? So Lincoln was acting as a dictator who wielded more authority than any single Englishman had done since Oliver Cromwell. And Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward, told the London Times, "We elect a king every 4 years. We give him absolute power within certain limits, which, after all, these limits he can interpret for himself." Right, so holding presidential elections becomes a way of justifying the expansive powers of constitutional dictatorship, not limiting them. So here was an exchange between reporter Helen Thomas and White House Press Secretary Dana Perino late in President George W. Bush's second term. So Helen Thomas says, "The American people are being asked to die and pay for the Iraq war. Are you saying that they have no say in this war?" "No, I didn't say that, Helen. But Helen, this president was elected." "Well, what it amounts to is you're saying we have no input. You had input. The American people have input every 4 years, and that's the way our system is set up. So once elected, the president owes no one any explanation for his conduct as president," is effectively what Dana Perino was saying. And then Vice President Dick Cheney told Chris Wallace of Fox News in his final days in office, right, "When you take the oath of office, you take the oath to support and defend and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." So watch the TV show Lioness. There's a CIA team that unilaterally decides that this certain person is a domestic enemy of the country, and therefore they can do with him what they will. So the President of the United States for 50 years is followed at all times, 24 hours a day, by a military aide carrying a football that contains the nuclear codes that he would use and be authorized to use in the event of a nuclear attack on the United States. The President could launch a devastating attack, the likes of which the world has never seen. He doesn't have to check with anybody. He doesn't have to call the Congress. He doesn't have to check with the courts. He has that authority because of the nature of the world we live in. So here, Vice President Dick Cheney casually informs the American people that the president can start a nuclear war if he deems it appropriate, and nobody can stop him. They can't stop him as an empirical matter. They can't stop him as a legal matter, right? That is as close as you can get to unconstrained power, just about as close as you can imagine.
This podcast is supported by
American Carnage, right? So
government, the demonizing of immigrants and other groups. And so I want to ask, is there anything so far that has surprised you about Trump or his administration or about other leaders in the country?
You know, I don't want to take credit for predicting what the Trump presidency would be like, because really it was all out there. He was spelling it out over and
this is Masha Gessen talking with Patrick Healy.
over again at rallies.
Very upfront.
There's Project 2025. I think I've been surprised, unpleasantly surprised, by the fact that even in his inaugural speech, he started going after trans people. Like, I knew he was going to go after trans people. Yeah. But the inaugural speech, like that one.
Okay, so what Masha Gessen calls going after trans people, I think most Americans would understand as protecting common sense, protecting our traditional understanding of what it means to be human, that there are two sexes, male and female. So going after trans people, right, you could also call the trans revolution going after our traditional normal understanding of what it means to be human and having the two sexes. So Colin Liddell says in the chat, "I'm worried about Luke. He's falling for the Trump foray pretty badly. How am I falling for it? I am excited about it, but I recognize that it could be an absolute disaster. Seems to me that Trump is being fairly effective towards goals that I'm sympathetic with. But who knows? Luke will be deeply embarrassed by these streams in a few months' time. There was Trump derangement syndrome, says Dooovid. Now there's Trump delusion syndrome. The blue-eyed people feel that Donald Trump will save America and that his erratic behavior is great leadership." So I read the mainstream news media, which is dominated by criticism of Donald Trump. I don't think I am blind to the arguments against what Trump is doing.
Was unexpected even for me.
Was it because that's the kind of speech where you think in terms of big themes, or just that's the kind of speech where you don't hear hate speech?
Well, no. I mean, if you recall, 8 years ago was American Carnage, right? So we knew not to expect a soaring vision of the future, right? And we know that Trump can rarely restrain himself from engaging in bad blood and resentment sort of trafficking. I think just the definitive, there are only two sexes, male and female, and I can't quote it word for word, but the signal that it was going to be legislated immediately. I think the prominence, I was quite aware of the prominence of his anti-trans rhetoric in the campaign, and it wouldn't have been illogical to expect it to be prominent in the presidency. But to be so front and center as to be part of the inaugural speech, that was even more sort of central than I expected it to be.
Masha, I was so surprised after that speech, given how blunt he was, that more people weren't standing up and calling him out for what he was doing, that he was essentially erasing trans people, trying to define America based on two genders, and then quickly followed that up with attacks, not just on trans people, on teachers who support transgender students, on issuing guidelines that hospitals have chosen to interpret a certain way. Why weren't and aren't institutions, hospitals, leaders, individuals speaking out more against this attack on a group of people who are one of the smallest, most vulnerable populations in the country?
So when you hear me say that I'm quite open to the possibility that many of Trump's moves may well turn out to be disasters, for example, Trump's Gaza plan may incentivize jihadis to start slaughtering Americans, and that would be as a result of Trump's Gaza plan. You think these are just empty words? You don't think I recognize the enormous scope for disaster in what Donald Trump is doing? So let's have a look at the chat here. Trump is attempting to play to the hopes and fears of the American people. Not sure how well that is working. Trump is massively playing to the hopes and fears of Jewish people. Well, Trump at most has the support of probably 40% of American Jews. And Collins says that I have blind spots, such as with regard to Trump's ridiculous Gaza peace plan. So I recognize that Trump's ridiculous Gaza peace plan may be an enormous disaster. I also recognize that I have a huge emotional euphoria just hearing it said out loud. So ties bind and blind, right? I am tied into the Zionist perspective. I'm tied into strong in-group Jewish identity. I'm tied into the Orthodox community. I feel a strong tie to Israel, and all those ties blind me. Absolutely right. So do I strike you as someone who has a great deal of difficulty admitting that I was wrong? Okay. I think I change my mind probably more easily than almost anybody of who I can imagine right now. My father said that about me, that I change my mind more easily and more frequently than anybody he knew. So I think that's an accurate assessment. All right, back to Mark Halperin's morning meeting.
Immediately. I think it's a dance in the Middle East. They're smart. They understand how to flatter Trump. They understand kind of how to play the game a little bit. And I think there is a question of, would Trump really send U.S. troops into Gaza and, rebuild this, or is he just pushing us and we'll wait him out? To me, that is really the big question. And the second would be just Europe coming to grips or terms with they need to own their own future versus rely on us. And I, both administrations have been telegraphing that a little bit now for the last 10 years.
Son.
Okay. I don't understand this lawsuit against New York leaders over sanctuary politics. So maybe this Fox News segment can help me understand what's going on here.
New York said on November 6th, the day after.
If you try to harm New Yorkers or roll back their rights, I will fight you every step of the way.
We've been here before.
We faced this challenge before, and we used the rule of law to fight back. And we are prepared to fight back once again.
Okay, so they were ready for this. There's a law in New York that was passed in 2019. It's called the Green Light Law, and it forbids anybody from cooperating with immigration workers, including those who work at the DMV. Does the state have precedent over the executive branch on this issue, or is it the other way around?
I think the federal government has a strong case here, particularly with regard to one of the provisions in that law, which is a tip-off provision. And under the law, if the federal government makes an inquiry into a suspected illegal alien, that person is then notified by New York and given a heads up. And the feds have said, well, what are you doing? I mean, we're making an inquiry because we may want to apprehend this person, and you're giving them a chance to abscond. And that's more than refusing to cooperate with federal enforcement. That's actually frustrating federal enforcement. So this is going to trigger a ferocious legal battle. The state on its side can argue that this violates what's called the anti-commandeering doctrine. And that's a line of cases that says that the federal government cannot commandeer or require the state to carry out federal policies or programs. Now, that's based on states' rights. But this is a very murky area because, as you can tell from those sound bites, Illinois and New York is actively trying to frustrate federal enforcement. And so the federal government's going to court and throwing a flag on this play and saying, you know, you're not allowed to do that. This is not commandeering. This is obstruction on your part.
Okay, this is going to be prominent in Illinois, New York, I imagine California as well. It's just something I'm curious about. What information does a DMV have that would be so critical for an ICE agent or somebody from the federal government?
Well, law enforcement groups objected to the New York law because it strips away the status of the person. And what many officers said is, look, we need that information. We need to know who we're dealing with. We need to know if they may want to abscond, they may want to flee. They actually may be violent because of their status and their desire to get away. You're keeping that information from us. And the feds are also saying, you know, we cooperate on driver's licenses and other forms of identification between the feds and state. And now you're saying we can't have access to that data because you don't want us to enforce immigration laws.
Yeah, that's one thing that New York does allow, you know, for you to get the papers that's necessary to drive a car or drive a truck or get to work or whatever you're doing. Professor, thank you so much. This is going to go on for a while, and we're going to lean on you as we go. Thank you, Jonathan Turley.
Thanks, Bill.
A busy morning for the Trump cabinet hopefuls. In minutes, Education Secretary nominee.
Okay, I want to get back to analysis from Halperin's morning show.
Who's in Trump's way?
Who's in his way?
What world leaders are currently a problem? Like Putin. See, he seems to have Putin and Xi kind of not neutralized, but Netanyahu too. Those are the big three typically, right? American leaders don't have leverage over Netanyahu, Putin, and Xi. Trump seems to be doing okay with all three of them right now. So who's in the way?
This, but I would actually say that Xi is not making it an issue. So I actually think that's the wild card. She has sort of said, you go play with those guys, and then we got to have our own little dance here.
Yeah, but that's different. Like right now, Trump doesn't need to spend bandwidth on what are we going to do about Xi. It's like in a nice holding pattern for him. He doesn't have him wrestle to the ground, but he's not a problem.
I don't think anybody's a problem. The only problems that are going to be self-imposed. You've got these. We're now on the 30-day deadline with Canada and Mexico. So at some point, he's got to get something to like. Once you start,
I'm not saying the problem is solved. The secret premise of my question is Trump has flipped the board over, put it back up, and put the pieces where he wants. There's currently nobody who's a problem for him.
Right.
There's challenges and there's challenges. Not a threat. They're problems. There's no threats. Zelensky's not a threat right now. Putin's not a threat right now. The way they were for Biden, like Sullivan and Blinken had to be worried. Like, what's Putin doing today? What's he up to? How are we going to deal with that? Same with Xi. I just don't. And same with Netanyahu. I don't see anybody right now who Trump's like, this is a crisis. How are we going to neutralize this person?
Mark,
it's not forever.
I don't know about
but
that.
right now, name the person. Who's the person who's
Netanyahu? Because if he goes into Iran and that goes side, but right now it's all talk. It's very easy to say, tough guy, you don't do this by Saturday. Like we have Israel's back. It's another thing if they go into Iran and stuff is shot up.
It could all go south tomorrow, but right now, jaw is beating war.
Hold on a second. Mark, do you think, because Netanyahu has flipped off every U.S. president for the last 40 years, he doesn't have Netanyahu by the balls. They just have him right now.
He doesn't have him by the balls, but Netanyahu doesn't have him by the balls today. That's my point. Today. He doesn't today.
I think he does.
He doesn't. He doesn't. Not compared to Biden.
Look, Bibi, by the way, we got 48 hours till 12 o'clock on Saturday when he gave that deadline to Hamas. So, but I don't think that Bibi's going to go out there and go nuts without checking in with him first.
Correct.
Wait. Check with him.
Sean, Hamas said they're going to release everybody. They backed down. So deadline's off. And that's another example. Again, I don't want to overstate it. It could all go south tomorrow. Putin could take more land. She could, try to take Taiwan. Stuff could happen. I'm just saying today, Thursday, February 13th.
So once Israel checks with the President of the United States to see if something is okay, that really means that Israel doesn't want to do it, right? Israel missed out on a major opportunity to get ahead in the war with Hezbollah by not taking action on October 11, 2023. This is former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant talking to Dan Senor on the Call Me Back podcast.
What was leading up to October 11th when you and Chief of Staff General Halevi were planning or thinking through or considering what to do, what sequence of steps could be taken against Hezbollah? So you had the one front in the south against Hamas, and you were already contemplating, since Hezbollah had already started attacking on October 8th, you and the senior command of the IDF were contemplating or planning for what could be done against this emerging northern front.
Well, as you mentioned, on October 8th, Hezbollah started a war of attrition against Israel. It started in Hermon Mountain, but very fast went all over the Galilee. Now, we understood, according to the intel, that their goal is to split Israel between Hezbollah and between Hamas. And we had 3 divisions over there, more than that, with dozens of thousands of soldiers and tanks and armed vehicles and you name it. And you need to preserve at least 2/3 of the Air Force in any given time in order to be ready for them. Now, on October 10, we got information that 14 leaders, 11 from Hezbollah and 3 Iranians, are going to meet together in a place that we know where it is, a shallow place, not very deep. This includes all the chain of command of Hezbollah, meaning Nasrallah, all the names that you can recall later on because we hit them one by one. And this was discussed even on October 10 with Prime Minister and the limited group that were consulting about the war. And I was speaking the whole night with all the officers, generals. I heard different opinions. There were some people that were in favor, some people that were against. I didn't sleep this night. And in the morning of the 11th, I went together with the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Air Force Commander to the headquarters of the Air Force. And I was sitting there with the officers, and they presented me the phases that I will elaborate very soon of how you are going to deal with Hezbollah. I was at the end of my evaluation. I went and I met with the Chief of Staff together with the Air Force Commander, and we got separately to the same understanding that we have to go forward with the operation that was ready to deploy. Now, what is the operation? Let me start by saying that this dramatic day could have changed the course of the war and the way that we deal in this war. We could have eliminated all the chain of command of Hezbollah immediately. Then the bigger strike will be to hit all the missiles and the rockets all over Lebanon, as we did on September 23.
So it was estimated there's some close to 200,000 rockets and missiles in Hezbollah's arsenal that it could, at a time of its choosing, unleash on Israel. And you're saying you could have preemptively taken out a lot of it.
We could have preemptive all of them because we did it a year later. And after a year, we succeeded to destroy something like 80%. At this time, it could have been 90 or 95% because a lot of it was in storages. So you don't have to hunt them one by one in the bush.
And you knew where they were?
We knew everything. You have seen it later on, a year later. And at this period, we knew much more.
Because they hadn't been moved around by then, at that time.
Some of them.
Yeah.
And that include all the heavy missiles. that can reach Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and other places, but also some smaller diameter rockets. Now, this is the second phase. And the third phase, which was the most critical one. Once we start to maneuver into the battlefield, as we did the next year, 15,000 terrorists would have put their vest with a walkie-talkie on their chest. In this walkie-talkie, there was 3 times more explosives that we had in the beepers later on. And it wasn't 4,000, it was 15,000. Once you initiate it, you kill 15,000 terrorists in one strike. The meaning is, if we were taking this opportunity and use it against Hezbollah, we could have eliminated all the leadership, all the missiles and the rockets, and most of their fighters. The meaning is that there is no Hezbollah physically. Now, the conditions were perfect. Why? One, full surprise. Second, they opened fire. There was the reason to start it was there.
It was a pretext, meaning it was a provocation by them attacking after October 7th.
They opened fire against Israel, unprovoked, on October 8th. So we have to retaliate. Third, there was an international backwind because of what was happening on October 7th. Fourth, the unity in Israel was perfect. On tactical condition, we had 3 or 4 divisions on the border, very difficult to penetrate them. The Iron Dome was ready and full to deploy. We could take out of balance the axis of resistance, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, by hitting the strongest component, Hezbollah. Now, I came to the Prime Minister and I said, when you fight 2 enemies, you need to hit the stronger one first. Otherwise, you will be exhausted by the time you are finished with the weaker one. And some people were asking me where this theory came from. I said, very simple, read Clausewitz, you will understand. This is basics of war. If you fight against few enemies, start with a stronger one, otherwise you will be exhausted. Now, the most important thing is not the condition. The most important thing is what could have happened. First of all, if there is no Hezbollah, you take divisions and brigades.
Okay, let's bring Dooovid onto the show. Dooovid, I would say that at most 40% of American Jews support Donald Trump right now. What's your read of the American Jewish community and its reactions to Donald Trump?
Well, I would agree with that. I'm not going to argue at that point where there's not overwhelming support, although it's higher than it has been, by saying Trump's basic strategy of placating the Jewish community, like I mentioned, it's near impossible for Trump to deliver on his promises to the American people. It's relatively easy for him to deliver on promises to the Jewish people. And the fact is, ethnic cleansing of Gaza is extremely popular among Jews, even leftist Jews, even among organizations. And even though leftist Jews are not becoming Republicans or supporting Trump like people like Charles Moskowitz or Ben Shapiro might have hoped, they're limiting their attacks on the Trump administration. I think back to, I would put in the chat, like 2016, the immigration stuff started happening. The biggest opponents were the Jewish community. My liberal rabbis got arrested. They protested. They blocked bridges. They blocked, people made trips, rabbis down to the border, DEI. And basically the Jewish response to that is muted. And here in Michigan, even think like Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, 2016, she would have been using the full power of the Michigan Attorney General's office to stop every single aspect of Trump's agenda. But now she's prosecuting Palestinian students, protesters. Almost nothing, maybe like a off comment to we disagree on immigration, but relatively the pro-Jewish, pro-Israeli, Semitism legislation has completely muted what would have been the normal mass Jewish organizational response to Trump's agenda.
Right. I don't see a big Jewish institutional opposition to Donald Trump right now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're remembering 2016. I was saying the Jews were at the forefront of opposition to Trump in 2016, and the Jews are basically not even on the map in opposition to Trump now. And I mean, it could be related to our weakened status, to the war in Israel and the mass protest, but I think it's also related to that they're secretly cheering on some of the things Trump is doing. Is like like I said, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza is popular even among leftist organizational American Jews, and cracking down on anti-Semitism and the various things. So they might be like, okay, let's give Trump a little bit of leeway to see if he could actually get these things done. Or, I mean, let's see what you think about this. We're saying, is it the leeway because they're secretly cheering on his Zionist agenda, or is it just the weakened status that they don't have the power that they had in 2016 to go directly against the president?
Probably both, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a combination of both. But I mean, you're agreeing with me. Remembering 2016, I know here.
Yeah.
The rabbis got arrested. It's like liberal rabbis were getting arrested to protest Trump's immigration and ICE raids. It was open. Like the ADL was calling Trump an anti-Semite, was calling him Hitler. It was completely different than it is today.
Right. So most American Jews are going to act and react in very similar ways to most Americans. So in 2017, a large number of Americans were violently opposed to Donald Trump and what he was doing. In 2025, the resistance is much more muted. And so in this respect, American Jews are reacting pretty much the same way that American non-Jews are reacting. For example, the NC2A has followed Donald Trump's executive order on transgenders in sports, right? I don't think they would have done that in 2017. Major corporations are doing away with their DEI departments. Universities are quite muted in their reaction to Donald Trump. So just like in Babylonia 1,800 years ago, right, the behavior of Jews is going to have a lot of similarities, Babylonian Jews at that time, with the behavior of Babylonians. And so to American Jews, likely, all things considered, to react and act in ways very similar to their fellow Americans. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, Jews are relatively practical, but I don't think Jews feel like they're fellow Americans, and it's causing problematic because Jews are maybe resigned to our fate and saying, okay, we don't have the power to change things, and it's not going to benefit us to push these issues that we care about. And also kind of like the Obama type, like, I'm very disappointed in America, in terms like I can't change it, and the resignation, like, well, really, there's nowhere better to go. What are you going to go to Canada? Trump's already thinking of annexing Canada. Israel's going to be in perpetual war, and a resignation to our declined status. The DI, I think, is also interesting because I think that's changed from Asian, mostly Indian competition, where Jews were basically the unquestioned, undisputed elites of America, and now it's certainly changed in universities, and starting to change in like Silicon Valley and elite status, where the Asians are slowly displacing us. I've done deep dives. I'm not sure how much we talked about this. I've mentioned it a few times on your show, like the decline of the accounting sector and the law sector, where like accounting and law used to be like 5% of the GDP, and that's declined to like 2% of the GDP. And that means that there's hundreds of thousands of upper middle class Jews that are no longer upper middle class because those accounting and law professions just no longer exist. We're just like your average Orthodox Jew could have squeaked their way through law school and made $100,000 a year. Now you can't really do that anymore. It's very difficult to there's very few lawyers. I mean, there's some, but and then also like the rise of IT in these Indian professions, coding. Almost all of these professions now, even like accounting, management, are less advantageous towards Jewish, maybe high verbal intelligence or networking, but to actually coding computers. And we're getting outcompeted from Indians, and that's also decreasing our power. And the Jewish community has to deal with our decreased power status, and that's why I'm not sure if you agree with this Trump delusion, the switch from Trump derangement syndrome to Trump delusion syndrome, and that, because Trump is pretty philo-Semitic, that somehow Trump is going to, not only make America great again, but he's going to return this elevated elite status to the Jewish people that has been on the decline.
I'm open to that analysis. I find it interesting. I don't have a position on it. You see that Jewish power, influence, and wealth in the United States is moving in a negative direction, correct?
Decline. I was thinking, for example, I'm doing chess coaching, and they had the state championship, and Jews used to dominate chess. I mean, not like completely, or like Russian Jews, but like now it's all Indians. And like schools that didn't even exist when I was a kid, like the elite schools that were maybe 20% Jewish and would have been the top schools, that's not the case anymore. The top schools now are almost like all like half Indian, and a lot of those schools have close to zero Jews in them. There's not even really an elite presence. My guess is probably in LA it's similar. I don't know what the elite school that secular Jews used to go to, but my guess is that they've declined, and there's probably new ones that are mostly Asian, and just demographically probably LA also, like I'm not sure, like the fire or something, but saying like the Palisade, like that community was probably like 20-30% Jewish, and you had it was kind of easy for a Jew to be upper middle class, and college admissions, and just economically, although the very wealthiest people like Jews are still becoming billionaires, rising to power, it's much more difficult to become upper middle class, largely due to Asian competition. And I think that's been a trend that I've been pointing out for like a decade. My dad's been telling me that for 30 years, since he was doing admissions to University of Michigan Medical School, and saying like, you Jews aren't doing very good. Like, Jews used to be 20% of medical school students. Now you're only like 5%. And like 20 years later, the effects are being felt where it used to be, like, oh, you remind me of my doctor. You remind me of my dentist. You remind me of my lawyer, my accountant, because like, 15-20% of accountants, lawyers, doctors, dentists were Jews. Those numbers have been on the decline, and they're at the lowest point they've ever been, and are set to keep on decreasing.
So most Jews who vote for the Democratic Party, they're still pro-business, right? American Jews overwhelmingly hate soak-the-rich taxation plans. They are overwhelmingly pro-business. They are opposed to hatred for the top 1%, because such a large component of the top 1% in America is Jewish. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, and I guess like that's Mark Halperin's point. I mean, he's not explicitly saying it, but I'll say it about the decline of the Democratic Party and kind of the coalition of oppressed minorities, because polling, the main thing that African Americans, that blacks want to see in terms of like why they come to the ballot box, why they support Democratic candidates, is more blacks in positions of power. And Republicans are, like, really the only way to get that is to replace Jews with blacks, because the Democratic Black coalition does not really have much influence on the right side. The fact that Trump has hardly appointed any black people in positions of power. They only have influence on the blue states, and places like Detroit, and where Democrats have control, and Jews disproportionately have positions of power in the Democratic Party, and you're going to see Jews being replaced with blacks, because blacks, that's what they want. They're not going to vote Democrat unless they see more of their people in these positions of power. And I'm not sure if you agree with that assessment, but that's part of
policies policies that promote excellence are going to be good for Jews because Jews have above average IQs, and they also have personalities that are also conducive to success in life. So there have been many clashes over affirmative action between Jews and blacks. So overwhelmingly, even Jews on the left do not like affirmative action. That frequently when affirmative action is instituted, Jews get laid off and replaced by blacks. So, for example, in New York City, hundreds of Jewish teachers were laid off so that other minorities could be promoted on a basis of affirmative action. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, that and actually leadership, where, I mean, it could have been at some point where, you know, maybe 30 years ago, like the superintendent of schools or these, positions of leadership of the whole city were dominated by Jews. And now I'd say it'd be near impossible, because the spoil system of those positions are almost always elected or appointed by elected officials. It would be near impossible for a Jew to have a leadership authority position over largely Black and Hispanic community.
And Jews put a higher emphasis in general on success and on work and on earning, not Haredi Jews, but non-Haredi Jews compared to your average American. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, Jews suffer what in Detroit or maybe LA that, they call usually is called the white savior complex. But I mean, really, you say like the Jewish savior complex, and like, certainly like when I tell Jews like, okay, I'm coaching chess and I'm in Detroit, and the first thing people usually ask me is like, well, when are they going to put you in charge? And I'm like, they're never going to put me in charge. Like, God forbid, like, if there was any, because it's, God forbid, it wouldn't happen now in the environment where they would put a Jew in charge of blacks. And like, I would almost be even to suggest that I should be put in charge of blacks would probably put me in jeopardy, as opposed to historically it would have, even leftist Jews would kind of just like, well, obviously, like, if you're there, like, presumably you're only doing it if you're going to be in charge. You don't just want to be an average teacher at a black school. You want to be the one in charge.
So what is surprising you, if anything, about the first 3 weeks of this new Trump administration?
I think the delusion syndrome among Jews, and I mean, it's not really surprising because I've been pretty vocal on opposition to the war in Gaza, and even using the G word, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing. And the fact that leftist Jews are largely supporting, left wing or being silent on, however you want to call it, what's happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, I predicted that, but I think that largely to the American public, that's surprising because it's breaking the narrative, where like Netanyahu's just this bad guy, this unhinged person, but generally, like, you can't blame all Jews. When the polling has been very clear. I mean, the Jerusalem Post had polling just this week, like over 80% of Israelis support the ethnic cleansing, or the removal of all Palestinians from Gaza. And even if it was forced migration, almost like 60% of Israelis support it, even if it's forced migration, and that probably includes Arabs. And then even from the river to the sea, Israel should be a Jewish state. 35% of Israelis support, meaning the full ethnic cleansing, not only of Gaza, but the West Bank. And I think you would find that a lot of liberal Jews, like like the Kevin McDonald, the hypocrisy, where I would say like, well, of course Jews are hypocritical because like Jews support support immigration and multiculturalism in America because it's in our best interest here, and we support ethno-nationalism in Israel because it's in our best interest there. It doesn't matter that it's hypocritical. It matters that it's in our best interest, and it's not just like, well, you should pick an opinion and be consistent with it, whether it's works for your best interest or not.
Okay, let me just interrupt you. Right-wing Jews support immigration restriction in both America and Israel. Left-wing Jews support more open borders in both America and Israel. It's really not inconsistent, right? Right-wing Jews in both countries support the same policies. Left-wing Jews in both countries support the same policies. So it's no more inconsistent than non-Jewish attitudes. Non-Jews on the left welcome more open borders. Non-Jews on the right welcome more immigration restriction.
No, I think you're wrong. I think that left-wing Jews in America do, in fact, generally still support ethno-nationalism in Israel.
But you have no evidence for that. That's just an assertion. You're not going to find evidence for that.
Well, I find evidence for it for the current state of politics, where even ADL, even the Jewish organizations are relatively mute or in support of, like, even like New York Times, of Trump's plan to evacuate Gaza, to ethnically cleanse it.
Well, I think left-wing American groups are being pretty clear that they oppose ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and left-wing American groups have decried Israel's repatriation of illegal immigrants. They decry American border controls. So I think you'll see upon examination pretty similar attitudes. Left-wing groups support more open borders, both Jewish and non-Jewish, both in America and Israel. So you're not going to find left-wing Jews who applaud Gazan ethnic cleansing.
Well, that's where I'm disagreeing. I think that at least the organizational Jewish community that are almost all left-wing have been supporting Trump's plan of ethnic cleansing Gaza. I mean, they certainly haven't been opposing it. They've been muted. Like even Thomas Friedman's.
Well, name one. Name a left-wing American Jewish group that supports Gazan ethnic cleansing.
We want to go through the public statements that have been made since Trump made his statement.
I said name a left-wing American Jewish group that supports ethnic cleansing in Gaza. You're not going to find one.
They're not going to use. I mean, even the right-wing American, aren't going to use that terminology. But in terms that have supported President Trump's plan, that obviously they're coy and politically astute. They're not going to come out and say we support, but they have been at least signaling that they think President Trump's plan is makes sense and should be considered.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find that. So I'm just looking at an article right now from the Jewish Chronicle in London. Jewish groups voice outrage, skepticism, and praise over Trump's Gaza remarks. So Jews on the right generally are going to be more favorable to Trump's Gaza plan. Jews on the left are going to be more opposed. So you've got all sorts of left-wing Jews describing Trump's plan as ethnic cleansing. And we have the Board of Deputies of British Jews say we want peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and that any plans for the Palestinians must be in line with international law. So you see Progressive Judaism openly criticizing America's president plan as troubling and morally wrong. I'm sorry?
American. You're quoting British Jewish leftist groups, not American. And I did certainly Jonathan Greenblatt was on MSNBC. You have seen the Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper interviews, and they've refrained from extreme criticism of Trump's plan and even signaled that there's some logic to it. I mean, you just quoted British sources, not American. You didn't quote like the ADL or the federations.
Okay, so let's go to the forward. Mainstream Jewish groups did not immediately respond to Trump, but partisan ones did. So reactions from partisan American Jewish groups to President Donald Trump's proposal for Gaza began flowing in. Mainstream groups did not immediately respond, but many groups did respond. Jewish Council for Public Affairs says unfathomably horrific and cruel and incredibly foolish.
What's the Jewish Council for Public Affairs? I mean, you're saying like
all sorts of Jewish American groups on the left immediately condemned it. CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Let me just hang on. Just let me just read the evidence. So, Jewish Council for Public Affairs called Trump's plan unfathomably horrific and cruel and incredibly foolish and fundamentally at odds with Israel's own future. Jewish Democratic Council of America said it's extreme, it's detached from reality, it's insane. Pro-Israel lobby J Street says we cannot express strongly enough opposition to the ideas being put forward by President Trump regarding Gaza. Most American Jews did not vote for President Trump, and then Zionist Organization of America is more positive. So left-wing American Jewish groups did condemn Trump's Gaza plan vociferously. Okay, Dooovid, back to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I mean, you didn't name like the big ones, and in a sense, like, yeah, there's hundreds of Jewish organizations. There's like Bend the Arc. There's the ones that support AOC and the Squad and the Bernie Sanders, and then there's the mainstream leftist organizations. And so, like, if you could name I'm sure you could name like 100 far left wing progressive organizations that have openly denounced Trump. But I would say locally, like the main Jewish organizations, the Federation. I'm not sure if the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, that one I wasn't familiar with. Yeah, I mean that's the one that has Amy. That's not that's the one that has Amy Splitonic. That's not a mainstream. All of those were far left organizations. Like if you say like the mainstream ones, like the ADL, the Council of the Council of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, the federations, are all of those, like your article even said it, they've been muted. They haven't denounced Trump. Some of the people, not as officially capacity of their organizations, but on news interviews, have made comments even in support of Trump's plan. I don't think you listed a single mainstream Jewish organization that voiced opposition to Trump's Gaza relocation plan.
Okay, let's just switch topic briefly. So I'm just curious, does resentment play a major role in your life? What kind of role has resentment played?
Very little. I'm saying, like, okay, I suffer human emotions like anger, resentment, but I make a point to forgive everybody or take self-responsibility for my problems. So occasionally say something could happen that would overwhelmingly take an emotional thing. Very rarely would it last overnight, sometimes 2 or 3 days at most, and then I would always use my meditative or different techniques I've learned over the decades to minimize it and not let it take control over me. Okay.
Please keep making comments in the chat if you're interested, and bring you back on as soon as I want you to amplify on anything. Any final words before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned resentment, and I see like Mike Benz made the rounds, and again he was on Joe Rogan, Tucker, I think someone else, like Elon Musk is constantly retweeting him. He's got almost 1 million followers on Twitter. I think even Piers Morgan mentioned Mike Benz. So you think like that might be an example, like I mean, resent could be different reasons, but like a lot of times, like, okay, someone else is doing well and I'm not doing as well, and that could really pick at you, and you haven't been commenting much on it. I saw you said the other day something like you have the political worldview largely the same as Mike Benz, but whatever reason, I'm not. I mean, do you resent Mike Benz and his rise, or are you how come you're not kind of like, oh, like I used to stream with him, he was one of my buddies, and try to like ride the fame thing. You're still replaying things that are not near, like Fox News. Like Mike Benz is way more popular now than Fox News, but you're still playing Fox News. You're not playing Mike Benz, even though like he was one of your buddies. He was very close to you. He was on your channel multiple times.
Great question. So if I were to tell you that I have almost no resentment about Mike Benz's success, do you think I'm lying? Do you think I'm self-deceived? Or do you think it's possible that I might be telling the truth?
Well, I said there's normal human emotions, because like, I was you're just joking around it, like just like a minor local ceremony for awarding chess coaches, but just the natural human emotion, like it should be me, not him. How come he's getting all the glory and the fame and I'm not? Or like his rise, that just natural human emotion. And it might just to hit you like the first time you saw him on Tucker, you're like oh, Mike Benz was on Joe Rogan this week, and something like, I'm sure that would at least for a second trigger some sort of resentment, or maybe you've came to peace with Mike Benz over a period, or are you saying that actually?
So I'm telling you that I experience almost no conscious resentment. I mean, it may well have popped up for a tiny period of time, but I am aware of no resentment about Mike Benz's success, because his success is not based on telling the truth, right? His success is built on an activist platform that uses truth in an instrumental way. And so do you think I'm self-deceived when I tell you that I experience virtually no conscious resentment against Mike Benz?
Well, because you just seem to say a coping mechanism, as opposed to saying that, I mean, you're giving an opinion that his success is not well-deserved.
No, I didn't say it's not well-deserved. I said it's not based on telling the truth. His success is deserved in that he is a formidable player. Like, he knows how to play the game. He's a formidable political activist, and I basically agree with all of his worldview, and I agree with the effects of his activism. I simply recognize that his work is not based on truth, right? He's not optimizing for truth. He's optimizing for effectiveness, which is a very worthy end, but it's not my end, and therefore I don't feel resentment over it, because he's playing the game in a very skilled way with skills that I don't have, and I'm not conscious of resenting my lack of skills in this area. I just have a very different agenda from Mike Benz, not in terms of politics, but in terms of method. So my method is to try to tell as much truth as I can. His method is to try to get as much done as he can. So we're playing different games, and that's how I understand it, but I'm open to the idea that I'm self-deluded. But back to you.
Just because you're using this, I mean, it seems like a pejorative. You're saying, well, like, how do you know he's not optimizing for truth? That it seems some sort of pejorative judgment, and let's say I push back, like, no, I think he is optimizing for truth.
Yeah, because when I hear him talk, he says so many things that are not true. He claims that he ran cyber for the State Department, right? Just total lie. He is constantly opining on things he doesn't know very much about. So it's very easy to see that he's not optimizing for truth. And that's not necessarily criticism. He is not attempting to optimize for truth. He is attempting to optimize for effectiveness, which is a very worthy goal, right? He is in the goal of political change.
Has he said what you're saying?
No, he doesn't say I'm not optimizing for truth. Obviously, that would reduce his political effectiveness. But when he says things like, I ran cyber for the State Department, that's an obvious, blatant lie. He says all sorts of things that are just blatantly not true. So that's fine. Like, he is not in the game of telling the truth. He's in the game of trying to be effective.
I mean, if I interpret that as a mild resentment, if you said, like, well, maybe he did do everything right. Maybe his rise is not based on making some sort of trade-off of something, but maybe he did everything right. And the reason why he's like the most famous guy in media today, and we're not, is not because he made some sort of trade-off that we were above making, but just because he's better than us. And actually, he's more optimized for truth than you are.
So when he says that he ran cyber for the State Department, do you think he's telling the truth?
I don't know.
I guarantee you that's a big, fat lie. I mean, you don't even need to know that much. There's no way that Mike Benz was running cyber for the State Department.
Saying that it's embellished. You say, like, yeah, I mean, it's almost certainly embellished.
It's a lie. It's a lie.
Saying you don't embellish things for yourself. You're
I do.
making the claim that you don't resent him because you don't resent the fact that his star has risen and our stars have stayed the same. Because the whole reason his star has risen is because he's resorted to certain practices that you're above.
No, it's nothing to do with above. We're just playing a different game. So I don't resent someone who, for example, is really good at gymnastics, because skills with gymnastics is not something that's important to me. He's simply playing a different game from me. ago, I just don't experience resentment. He is playing a game of being an effective political player, and that's never been my goal. So I remember once he came on the show, and very early on in the segment, he says, "Look, I love you, but you're making absolutely no difference in the world." And I thought that was a fair critique. I've got a tiny audience, and he was aiming at a different goal than me. He was aiming at changing the world, and I was aiming at trying to tell as much truth as I could. So different goals, different methods.
Is there a counterexample where, I mean, like you're in Hollywood, like is there a counterexample? I can't think of even a close second of someone that you had, pretty close interaction with that has risen to fame. And you're saying like, is that, just normally, like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I used to know this guy. Now he's one of the most famous people on the planet now. Big deal. No whoop, not even hardly worth a mention. As opposed to, you'd be like, yeah, like, I helped him on his path, like trying to ride the coattail or something like that. So I just, trying to gauge your reaction to that.
I'm sure that that's come up, and I am not immune from any human emotion, including jealousy and resentment. But I would say that resentment does not play a big role in my life. I am not somebody who's filled with resentment. Resentment played a much bigger role in my life 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It currently plays a diminished role in my life compared to in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you on saying, like, I don't think I'm not like a hateful, resenting, jealous person regularly than just normal human emotions. I don't read you that way either. I mean, if you're not, just one last point, because like my biggest resentment largely is probably the same as yours, the failure to have children. I know my dad, we were talking about this Orthodox Jew that, our family knew pretty closely, and he's got, like 50 grandchildren, or, he had a bunch of kids. And, maybe it was difficult. My dad maybe has 2 grandkids now, and maybe it was difficult for him to accept that, he just made lifestyle choices that weren't conducive to having, say like a big happy family like this Orthodox Jew, and might make some kind of like necessary psychological, like diminutive assertion, like, because like, I mean, although he didn't live his lifestyle in the way that was conducive to having a big family, with grandchildren that get together, and that's likely why it didn't happen for him, as opposed to putting it to kind of like extenuating circumstances or diminishing. And I would say like that's certainly the biggest hit in my life, where I feel resentment all the time, and that or jealousy all the time, just someone who has children, even just like like the African American students that I teach, just like a jealousy, like you succeeded and I'm teaching your children because I don't have my own children to teach. But I wouldn't call that resentment, but I say like I feel that multiple times every day, every time I see someone with children, every time people talk about their children. I assume you're probably the same.
No, I don't experience that. I experience twinges of that occasionally, but it's not it's not all the time. It's not particularly intense. It's periodic, intermittent, and not strong. So I don't experience a great deal of regret. I believe I have the attitude that given who I was at various stages of my life, I could not have acted differently, but I'm completely open to the possibility that I am deluded. Do you think I am deluded when I posit to you that regret and resentment, including over the matter you just mentioned, plays a relatively minor role in my life right now?
No, I didn't say it plays a major role in my life. But
no, I'm asking, do you think I'm deluded? I'm not asking about you. I'm asking your assessment of me. Do you think I'm deluded here? I don't mind if you say, yes, you're completely deluded.
No, I don't think you're deluded. I was saying from myself, like, I don't think it plays a major role by saying that's the one that comes up constantly all the time, because I think that is in my life, that is my largest regret. And that's something that, like, okay, Mike Benz rising to world fame or something that I talked to him once, or that, one of my, contemporaries, person maybe I dispute with rose to fame and more prominence than me, or whatever would normally cause resentment. I don't think, but it's saying like that hits me all the time. constantly. But yeah, I don't think it's like I'm a resentful person or like.
But do you think I'm deluded when I tell you this doesn't hit me all the time with much
No, I was asking you because I say, like, if I was saying the biggest thing that constantly causes me possibly resent or jealousy on a regular basis is, just seeing people with happy families and children.
Right, but do you think I'm deluded? Do you think I'm deluded about myself?
I was asking you honestly, just saying, maybe.
Right, and I'm trying to answer honestly, so feel free to tell me, do you think I'm deluding myself because you think I'm afraid to face the overwhelming amount of pain that I might feel in this area? Because it does flood me occasionally, right? I do get flooded with this
I don't
pain.
think deluded, but you're saying, are you agreeing with me that in terms of if there's anything that causes you resentment or jealousy, that's probably the highest of them? Or you say, actually, there's other things that cause you more?
No, the thing that causes me the most regret is the health problems that accompanied my vegetarian diet and also not dealing with my ADHD. So I see the lack of family and lack of marriage and kids as a consequence of having a lifetime of health problems and untreated ADHD. So the health problems related to my vegetarian diet and the untreated ADHD are my two biggest regrets that cause me the most pain. And marriage and kids is a consequence of not dealing with these problems.
Well, maybe they're two separate, resent and regret, because regret is usually a recognition that you yourself were at fault, as where resentment is usually outward upset. So, like, how would those result in, like, what you resent other people that you had these health, that you resent other people that you did these things? Or
yeah, I periodically have,
when you see other healthy people,
resentment that I was raised with a vegetarian diet. It's resentment at a pretty low level because my parents believed that they were doing absolutely the healthiest thing for me. And I have some regret that I didn't change, that I didn't listen to other people who told me all my life, particularly starting in my teens, you need to eat meat to be healthy, and that my health problems would go away if I ate meat. So I was told that from my teens onward, and I just had a wall against that truth. And it was only 3 years ago that I managed to regain my health in this area. So I do have some regret, and this is probably the biggest area of regret for me, that and my untreated ADHD.
And that you're saying because, like, every day constantly you see people just eating meat and eating these diets that you didn't, and it constantly triggers that, because, like, all you have to do is walk down the street.
No, it's not constant, but out of everything that I regret, this is the biggest one. But it was bigger when I first recovered my health taking these beef organ capsules. So for weeks after that, I just had a tremendous sense of loss from how much my life had been stunted due to my vegetarian diet. But after a few weeks, I processed the loss, and I think I can provide evidence that I've processed the loss because I can talk about it without my voice cracking, without all sorts of weird interfering muscular tension running through my face, right? I experienced the loss. I mourned. I processed it. Now I've come out the other side so that the regret is no longer as major as it was initially.
So maybe close on a Torah thing. We've mentioned it a few times, that the Gemara in Sukkah, where it says, at the end of days, God will slaughter the Messiah, or God will slaughter the evil inclination, and the wicked people will see that their evil inclination was as small as a piece of rice, as where the righteous will see that their evil inclinations were the size of mountains. And, that maybe if you're put in terms of resentment, you say, like, yeah, small people, they resented really minuscule things like the forbidden sexual relations they didn't have, or base emotions like jealousy, anger, that draw a person's life down for no reason, as where, like, righteous people, they were wrestling with these huge issues. And so, even though I have my failures, I haven't given up on life. You're still streaming, you're still trying to use your mind or accomplish things. So maybe, I'm not sure if we've talked about that Gemara in the past, but to put that in terms of resentment, where righteous people, they're not drawn down at resentment, or if they are resenting, they're resenting that they weren't able to tackle these large issues.
Okay, let me add one thing, but I'll give you the option of declining. I want to swap our assessment of each other's biggest delusion. Do you want to swap that? And I'm willing to go first, but it might be painful for each of us. Do you want to step into this possibly painful territory?
You're saying admitting what I think my own biggest delusion is?
No. I'm going to give you an assessment of what I think your biggest delusion is, and I welcome your assessment of what you think my biggest delusion is.
Oh, sure. I don't necessarily think you're a deluded person. I say like the Trump delusion syndrome, I think, is something mass that's affecting.
Okay.
But so
okay.
I don't necessarily think that you're.
Okay. So I will offer this to you. I think your biggest delusion is that you don't realize you need to get help. That whether it's a 12-step program or a good psychiatrist or medication or a mentor in some area, I feel like your life could vastly expand with help. That's what I would contend. Do you have any reaction?
Could be. I saw this like clip. You remember the Goodwill Hunting with the Robin Williams where it's like, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And so I was watching like this reaction video of like the compilation of a bunch of people reacting to that, and like people were crying, and like I even admit like I saw it and a few tears went down and so the character in that, like, first things you're gonna say I have detachment syndrome or something, like I've read the books, I know what psychology says about my condition. And maybe like, okay, like I've read the books about help. I haven't seen a therapist, but I say like I think that's why I stream. The same reason you said you converted to Judaism or stream is kind of like the cry for help. Like I'm here talking to you, and the feedback, even doing publicly. Largely I take feedback, so I'm not exactly sure like what you mean. Like I didn't seek therapy. I didn't like knock on my rabbi's door and like please help me. But I think like relatively no, I am amenable to feedback and help.
And do you want to offer anything to me in this regard?
I mean, I think you're. I would say that your Jewish identity is probably your biggest delusion, although that's a difficult issue, and saying that we can reject your Jewish identity, or if I'm going to read into saying, I mean, and also you're pretty open about it. So in the same way that like, this is my identity, this is how I go to sleep at night, this is how I see myself, and you might be open to, alternative interpretations. But that would probably be my biggest point in this thing. We've argued about this ad nauseum, so I wouldn't necessarily claim that you're deluded about your identity, but because you're open to criticism.
What's one thing you would like me to do? Like, is there one thing, like I would like you to get help, whether it's from some sort of mentor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a rabbi. I'd like you to reach out to someone that you respect or ask around and get help. But what about for me? What would you wish for me to do to improve my life? Is there anything that comes to mind?
No, I mean, I think you're streaming, you're talking to people, you're open to criticism and feedback. And I'm not, I mean, you're saying like I have to admit I have a problem and need help, because like I have mentors. I have like not just streaming, like in real life, I have mentors. I have people that I seek advice from. So I'm not, I mean, you're saying like, I like, like you need help, you got a problem, Dave, you need therapy, or I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. Like, like
I think that you could have a higher quality of life. You just need the right mentor. You need the right guide. And I have no idea who that might be, but I think that, your life could improve.
Opposed to that, but by saying like practically, like, okay, like you're my mentor to some extent. Like,
yes,
I have mentors in really everything I do, like, chess and when I was more involved in Judaism or any activity. And if you're just saying like, okay, I need help, I need to see a therapist, I need to join like 12 steps or something like that, I'm probably not going to do that. But like if you actually, you're like, okay, like I've been looking around and like here's this guy in Detroit I know, oh, are you willing to speak to him? Like I probably would, unless it was going to be a clear example of something who's going to try to force me to do things I didn't want to do. But no, I'm completely open to mentorship, and I even agree that's one of my problems is the lack of mentorship, and that's that's probably why I'm sitting here seeing that you streamed and popped on and you gave me the link. Like, oh, great, like you, like I need help, but I'm looking for the right answers, And unfortunately, experience has told me, like, I don't think I'm actually going to largely benefit from like getting a therapist or going to my local synagogue and asking the rabbi if he has time to something like that, and largely because I've tried those things in the past and they didn't work.
I would posit that there's someone at a synagogue in Detroit who could become a mentor for you. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's mentors all over. Like, okay, so I was thinking of going Sunday to like the Jewish Voice for Peace Tu B'Shvat Seder. And like, okay, like there's even, someone who is partners with my mom. There's older people, and I would accept mentorship and advice. I mean, politically, like I probably, if I went to my local modern Orthodox synagogue, there would be too many things that would just be like, well, the problem is like, you got to completely change this. And it really wouldn't be mentorship, because the prerequisites of change for me and think like Orthodox, Chabad, I mean, it's kind of like a cult like that. You have to join for their mentorship. And I would agree. I've always sought mentorship, and that's probably why I've been into so many cultic organizations. And I've had improved relationships with my father to, maybe I sought extreme Judaism or the Hare Krishnas or different things because of my distant relationship with my dad. But in the last few years, especially since COVID, I'm taking care of my mom. I've improved my relationship with my dad, so my dad is probably my main mentor now.
Okay, David, good to talk to you, man. We'll talk another time.
Okay, yeah, appreciate it. God bless. Good to see you streaming.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, this is one of my favorite 12-step channels. It's called Optimal Recovery.
My self-esteem, my feeling good about myself, wow, has been dependent on what other people think or do or behave or don't behave. I'm a control person, and what a futile life it has been in that regard. It's been exhausting, disappointing,
yes,
disillusioning. I'm flat on the floor with humility here and embarrassment.
Well, wow. Listen, I appreciate you being so vulnerable about all that, Judy. It's such an appropriate reaction to what you've been experiencing. You see, to be disillusioned with what you've been doing is really a very healthy thing. Because with that being disillusioned, it allows you to start letting go of these old ideas, start moving towards adopting a new set, or developing a new consciousness that's going to open a lot more doors for you and create freedom, rather than this frustration and futility and, and disappointment that you're feeling. So I appreciate you sharing all that.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
What that does, that's what our emotional dependency does. It paints us right into that corner. That saying that Bill says, our troubles we think are of our own making, is truer words have never been said.
I have a new, totally new, different appreciation for Herb K's drawing of him in the middle of the desert holding just one small bar that's impeding his freedom. And I have a glimmer of hope, so I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm glad you have a glimmer of hope, because hold on to that. Let's hope that hope grows, right?
No kidding.
Really becomes a guiding force in your life. That'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for all your help and everybody's. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we're off to a great start tonight. We are now continuing our discussion of the 12th insight from my book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, which is about holding on to ourselves in relationships. And, for the last several weeks, we've been just exploring this from a lot of different perspectives. Last week, I talked about paying attention to our attitudes and our behavior and see if they either fall in the category of enhancing our encounter and our relationship with the people that we care about, or do they take something away? Do they diminish our connection and the encounter we're having? And we explored that at depth last week. Tonight, I'm going to talk about, as we start to now really focus in on holding on to ourselves, what does it mean to have autonomy in our relationship? And I prepared some slides for that tonight, so I'm going to be using those. So bear with me for a minute while I pull those up. There we go. Okay. Now, as we continue to grow ourselves along these lines, meaning as we mature, we are transcending this idea that we need environmental support to be okay and moving towards the ability to support ourselves. Now, as I mentioned before, that's on a continuum, right? From environmental support to self-support. Early on in life, it is quite appropriate for us to be completely dependent on our environment for support. We're not able to support ourselves. In fact, when we're born, the first act of self.
So I think this is one of the most positive directions in my life, to become more internally validated rather than relying on people and things outside of myself to make me feel okay about myself.
Support is that we start breathing for ourselves instead of oxygen being provided to us through the umbilical cord. So we take the first step towards an unending march towards differentiation, towards self-support. So when you hear me use the word emotional differentiation, it's synonymous with self-support. It's synonymous with emotional maturity. It's synonymous with growing up. All right. So when you hear me use those words, relate them. All right. They're all the same thing that I'm talking about. That movement towards self-support is an imperative in your life. It happens. It's happening all the time. Now, sometimes you're moving towards what you can be. The problem is that when you hijack that imperative, which is going to actualize whatever you attach it to, when you attach it to becoming your false self and you dedicate yourself to actualizing your false self, then you start losing yourself big time in your life. And that force, that growth force that can be so valuable, is now hijacked by our dedication to being someone we're not. Now, the problem is we try to become someone we're not perfectly. You know, we try to do it as much as we can. Like I said, I've never met an alcoholic or an addict who's had half measures. You don't go into alcoholism and become half-ass alcoholic. You go all the way. Same thing with addiction, right? That kind of a thing. So that force is going to grow. It's like miracle grow. It's going to grow whatever it's attached to. But as we start to learn about and become aware of, as we talked about in these 12 essential insights, of our emotional dependency, and we start to, that paradoxical theory of change, as we own it, we start to develop, or we start to discover a new possibility of learning how to support ourselves. So what does that look like? And that's what I want to talk to you tonight, is what does autonomy look like in a relationship? So first of all, let's understand this, that interdependence in a relationship is not all that it's cut out to be. You'll hear people say that it's really important to be interdependent in your marriage or in your relationships, is that you guys have to work together as a team and all of that stuff. And some of that, it's wonderful, right? Being coordinated and cooperating in a relationship with someone is a wonderful thing. But there's a problem in it. There's some small print. Because the greater the interdependence in your relationship, the greater the struggle you're going to have to find a healthy balance between we and I. Because what's going to happen is your partner's going to say, well, I want you to do this. And if you're interdependent with them, you're going to feel the pull towards being what they want you to be instead of staying in touch with yourself. So the relationship can easily fall out of balance, right? And it falls out of balance in one of two ways. It falls out of balance in either the direction of now giving too much privilege to the abandonment anxiety and not doing anything that is going to evoke that anxiety in your partner, and then feeling so controlled, and then it evokes this engulfment anxiety that I'm being controlled by this other person. So when there's interdependence in a relationship, it triggers a lot of this kind of a reaction that's based on abandonment anxiety or engulfment anxiety. Abandonment is you're going to leave me. Engulfment is you're going to try to control me and I'm going to lose myself. In either case, you're going to lose yourself. I'm going to lose myself if you leave. I'm going to lose myself if you control me. When that happens, now a relationship devolves into a power struggle. And now it's about who's going to get their way and whose anxiety is going to be honored in a relationship. And when that happens, love and empathy and safety goes out the window. Because now it's all about control, power struggle, compromise, all of these things that start to destroy any real love and connection. It's kind of a grim picture, isn't it? And every relationship is going to go through this period of disillusionment where it's going to devolve into this.
So that's Alan Berger. He is an author, published many books on 12-step recovery. He is a PhD in psychology, and he is a former Marine. And he's a friend of Herb Kay, who's another 12-step thinker. So I was just playing an excerpt from an interview with former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. I'd just like to play about 3 more minutes of this interview.
Gates and send them from the north to the south, so you can work simultaneously in Gaza.
Right, so on October 11, right, 2023, Yoav Gallant wanted to wipe out Hezbollah. Right, there was a golden opportunity to wipe out Hezbollah, and Israel's Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu decided against it because he didn't want to distract from the war on Hamas in Gaza, and he didn't want to create problems with Israel's relationship with the United States.
In Khan Yunis and Rafah, so you can shorten the war into half or 1/3. Second, you don't have to evacuate communities from the north because no one is there. And of course, you are not depend on what we called red lines. We always kept enough munition to retaliate against Hezbollah if they will open.
So if Yoav Gallant is presenting an accurate picture, Israel made a major mistake not launching this October 11, 2023 war on Hezbollah.
A full war. So you don't have to keep it, and you can concentrate yourself on the south. If you look on this situation, this is the most important point in the war after October 7, and we didn't use it. Now, in America, you used to say water under the bridge. And I say it's very unique that the water comes under the bridge twice. And that's what happened here, because after a year, we got a similar chance. And then we find ourselves killing the terrorists, the missiles, Nasrallah, and all the other issues step by step. No surprise. And we were able to do it in more difficult conditions. The meaning is that we could have done it very precisely in a way that could have changed the war, but we didn't use this opportunity.
And to be clear, because I think many of our audience is familiar with the images of the pager attack, as we all saw images of it. You're saying that the walkie-talkies, which, as we know it, followed the pager attack, that would have been the primary attack, and it would have affected, I think you said 15,000, 16,000?
15000.
Okay, 15,000 Hezbollah fighters, because they put on their vests, the walkie-talkies go here, over the heart, they go to fight, and the walkie-talkies blow them up, and you eliminate a big part of the Hezbollah.
This was the major operation. The secondary operation was the beepers.
Right. We just know it in a reverse sequence.
Well, the beepers turned to be very famous because this was the operation that worked.
Right.
But the major operation, the one that we invested in for so many years, it was ready for years, not one day. This is something we could have done on October 11 and eliminate Hezbollah.
Now, if the world was watching the Hamas massacre on Israel South, and I do think initially, and it changed, but initially there was some understanding, there was some consensus internationally that Israel would have to respond to Hamas. Do you not think just diplomatically and geopolitically it would have been risky for Israel to say, we know you're all focused on the South and Hamas, but we're going to take on this organization, Hezbollah, that really hasn't been, I know for Israelis, especially Israelis in the North, it was a big part of the story on October 8th. But for the world, they didn't know from Hezbollah, at least as it relates to that war. They knew of Hamas, they knew of the massacres in the South, and suddenly Israel's going somewhere else on another front. Would it have been hard to, get the U.S. and others on board?
Your goal in the war is to gain victory, nothing else. All the rest is less important. And in order to gain victory, this was the right thing to do. And if you need to recruit someone, you can do it either before or after. So once we have done it and succeeded, the rest will be followed. So with all the respect to our partners around the world, we need to defend ourselves by ourselves. And no one is going to fight for us. And you can look around on the world and understand what I'm talking about.
So you knew of this plan because you had conceived of it with the Army chief, the IDF chief of staff. The prime minister obviously knew about it. Did the war cabinet know of this plan?
Well, I don't blame the war cabinet because, eventually after I finished with the chief of staff, I went to see the prime minister. And the prime minister immediately told me, go and talk to Jack Sullivan. I'll talk to the president. When I heard that, I understood he doesn't want to get into it because you don't talk to the president of the United States who doesn't like the idea of the war being expanded. so you know what will be the answer. And I argue a little bit with the Prime Minister, and eventually myself and later on Dermer joined me, and we talked to Sullivan, and we heard a very negative answer. I came back to the Prime Minister and said, we must do it. He was pointing to Tel Aviv from his office to the buildings around us, and he said, you see all these buildings? Nothing will survive because of the retaliation of Hezbollah after you attack them. And he reiterated many times later on, in this day and in other days. And I wasn't that pessimistic. And I was thinking that we can win Hamas and win Hezbollah. And I was fully aware of our capabilities. And by the way, afterwards, I went to see the commanders, and I was preparing this operation together with them. And I tried to call the Prime Minister. And because he didn't receive the call, I sent somebody to ask his office to connect us. And it didn't help. So eventually I went by myself to his office. And I was asked to wait. And after 10 minutes, when I was entering the room, I find Eisenkot and Gantz.
Okay, so let's set this up. So you walk into the office, Gadi Eisenkot and Benny Gantz, who at this point were not part of the government before October 7th. They had joined the government. They had been in opposition. They joined your government, and they were now serving in the war cabinet. I mean, didn't they join that day?
I went to the Prime Minister's office. When I enter the office, I find them discussing the issue of a government, a unity government, together with them.
So they're in the discussion about the idea of a war cabinet, including them and them joining the government.
So the reason that I'm walking, I think it was something like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock. I'm walking into the Prime Minister's office. After 10 minutes, I'm allowed to enter in, and then I find the Prime Minister and Gantz and Eisenkot preparing the unity government. So the Prime Minister asked me to present this idea in front of them as well. And they reject the idea. And at that time, I understood the situation is that most likely it won't be approved because the Prime Minister against it and the Gantz against it and Eisenkot, and they recruit the American president as well. And I was urging them to come to the cabinet and to have a meeting as soon as possible, because this meeting of Hezbollah is going to take place at 6 p.m. or so for an hour, 2 hours, something like that.
And you know of this now from your intelligence sources?
Yes, we knew it from the day before, and we were very precise about the location. It was proof later on that our intel is good. And we are looking for this window. Eventually, when you collect the cabinet at 5 o'clock or so, maybe a little bit before that, and ask them to approve such a dramatic move, some of them are sitting the first time in their life in this cabinet. They just joined today, and they are sitting there. You can understand what will happen. And when I presented it to the cabinet, and then the Prime Minister asked Gantz what is his opinion, and Eisenkot, and they reject, and he rejected. So the situation was very clear. And in between, because the window of opportunities was about to be ended.
And just to be clear, the fighter jets are sitting there on ready to go.
It's more than that. Because the situation was that the window is about to be closed within 1 hour, I ordered the Chief of Staff and the Air Force Commander to take off. So at the last point of the discussion, the planes are on the air ready to attack. And then we got a negative decision and they are landing. So if you ask me what could have happened, we could have shortened the war into half. We could have dismantled totally Hezbollah, but we lost this opportunity.
And just to be clear, the way you think, I know it's hard to do counterfactual history, but had you hit Hezbollah, you would have obviously taken them off the map in terms of a front. That those communities, tens of thousands of Israelis living in the north, may not have had to have evacuated the north, right, for a year.
Of course, 60,000 people.
And the IDF, in your view, would have then been able to pivot and focus exclusively on...
The whole idea of Hezbollah was to split the abilities or the capabilities of the IDF, north and south. Once they're gone, you take all of the forces that were responsible to block Hezbollah and you send them to the south. You double and more than that the amount of forces that you can deploy in Gaza. The meaning is very clear. And of course, you reach deterrence in the first week and not after a year. So everything could have been changed.
And it wouldn't have distracted from whatever planning or readiness for the war in Gaza?
When you fight two enemies, start with the stronger one first. Hezbollah is the stronger one, not Hamas. Once you finish with him, there is nothing that Hamas could have done because no one is going to support them. And to those of us who ask, what about the Iranians? I will ask, what about the Iranians? We have seen what they did after we attacked Hania and after we attacked Nasrallah, and eventually they hit us and we hit them, and they kept silent because of the efficiency of the IDF that we can discuss later on. But basically, you see that the capabilities and the determination was there. So under much more difficult conditions, we succeeded to deter Iran and to destroy some of the capabilities of Hezbollah in a very sophisticated way. If this would have been done in a sequence in the first days, the achievement could have been tremendous. And the lesson that was learned by all our enemies, that it's not a good idea to start a war with Israel, could have been learned after a week and not after a year.
So again, just so our audience can visualize this, the beeper attack of late September 2024, which was incredibly dramatic and everyone in the region and here was dazzled by, basically hit 4,000 Hezbollah operatives, terrorist combatants, and you know, it wounded them. It probably took them off the battlefield, I don't know if permanently, but it was 4,000. You're talking about eliminating permanently 15,000 Hezbollah fighters.
That's correct. First of all, let me salute to those who came with the ideas and initiate the operation of the beepers. This was excellent operation, but this was the secondary effort. The major effort was to kill 15,000 terrorists with the walkie-talkies on their chest. And this have to be done in a sequence that will bring them to the situation that they put their vest on. What happened was that once we initiate the beepers, because the enemy was about to find them, that was the only reason that we initiate them on 17, 18 of September, 24. They suspect, we kill some of them, they send some machines in order to check it, but eventually we learned that there are 3 beepers that are checking them. At this point, we didn't have any choice. We use them.
Use it or lose it.
Exactly. Use it or lose it. We use it. It was a remarkable achievement. About 2,000 terrorists were hit in the hips, in the eye, in the fingers. The technology was there. And by the way, these 2 operations were ready maybe 10 years or 5 years before the war started. I mean, it was ready to deploy as a special tool for a war. Now, after doing that, the next day we learned to know that they suspect the walkie-talkies. So we initiate the walkie-talkies, and what was happening is that 200 of them were working efficiently, and all the rest were in storages and in isolated places, and it blew and nothing happened. So this is a big miss of this war. And the issue is not only the walkie-talkies and not only the beepers. The issue is that if you make a full campaign, and we could have done it on October 11, then you achieve the full momentum and the full influence of such an operation. In this case, everything was step by step by itself. It was enough.
So if what Yoav Gallant says is accurate, right, a major miss by Israel, they could have essentially taken out Hezbollah on October 11, 2023. 60,000 plus Israelis would not have had to evacuate from the north. Israel would have had more forces to concentrate on Hamas in Gaza. Iran's biggest funded military group, Hezbollah, would have been destroyed. So a devastating miss that probably needs to be laid at the feet of Bibi Netanyahu. All right, I've been reading a few choice excerpts from a terrific essay in the Minnesota Law Review by 2 Yale law professors talking about constitutional dictatorship. Right, so the most bitter enemies of the George W. Bush administration, who believed that George Bush and Dick Cheney systematically made disastrous misjudgments and even committed criminal offenses, they never genuinely worried that President Bush and Vice President Cheney would try to extend their terms of office by decree, or that they would attempt to suspend the constitutionally required election and the inauguration of a successor. So, no matter how boldly presidents appear to act, the tradition of regular elections is firmly rooted in the American political system. But this does not negate the fact that on many occasions our presidents, including Lincoln, Roosevelt, Bush, and Obama, are, on many matters, essentially constitutional dictators. right? It's not just President Trump, but many presidents have become constitutional dictators in many areas because they exercise unchecked powers on important questions of life and death, and they exercise these powers under rules set forth in the Constitution and legal precedents, and because they retain these powers so long as the Constitution and law allows them to. So these dictatorial powers are usually not put into effect. All right, President Gerald Ford could have ordered a full-scale nuclear attack on the Soviet Union, right? But there's no reason to believe he was ever tempted to do so or encouraged to do so. But this was not the case with Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, right? Each of them received advice from high-ranking U.S. military officers and other advisors that the United States should use its nuclear monopoly or its advantage in arms, right? So the case of monopoly was under President Truman. The case of advantage in arms was under Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy to launch a preemptive attack on the Soviet Union and bring an end to the not-so-cold war. Now, traits that are latent become manifest when certain circumstances arise, when we enter a state of exception. And many presidents are ambitious to leave a mark on history. Donald Trump wants to leave a mark on history. So they see a threat and they justify armed conflict, right? Whether or not the 9/11 terror attacks changed everything, they provided everything that a would-be constitutional dictator could wish for, right? Congress readily ceded broad new powers to the president through the Patriot Act. So every time President George W. Bush asked for broad new authority from Congress, he received that broad new authority. And what's remarkable, given this legislative record of acquiescence, the Bush administration still tried to grab more discretionary power. Right? They created secret programs that violated existing law, and they would disregard many congressional regulations of the president's powers as commander-in-chief.
Of what Sean just said.
Well, I think it's right. There will be a conference and there won't be a conference. It's not going to be the old-fashioned conference where you sit out in public and actually negotiate. I've seen
that bill as a standalone is very, very hard to get through the Republican House. So I think everyone is pushing for their equities, and it doesn't surprise me. Years.
Son, who's in Trump's way?
Who's in his way?
What?
Second, Mark, do you think, because Netanyahu has flipped off every U.S. president for the last 40 years, he doesn't have Netanyahu by the balls. They just have to respond right now.
He doesn't have him by the balls, but Netanyahu doesn't have him by the balls today. That's my point. Today. He doesn't today.
I think he does.
He doesn't. He doesn't. Not compared to Biden.
Look, Bibi, by the way, we got 48 hours till 12 o'clock on Saturday when he gave that deadline to Hamas. So but I don't think that Bibi's going to go out there and go nuts without checking it with him first.
Correct.
Wait. Check with him?
But Sean, Hamas said they're going to.
Bobby Kennedy Jr. has been approved as Health and Human Services Secretary. So Donald Trump is essentially so far getting all his cabinet. Unbelievable.
Release everybody. They back down. So the deadline's off. And that's another example. Again, I don't want to overstate it. It could all go south tomorrow. Putin could take more land. She could, try to take Taiwan. Stuff could happen. I'm just saying today, Thursday, February 13th, I don't see a single world leader who Trump has to currently worry about. How do we check what they're doing? Even Iran.
Okay, right. Agree.
Yeah. Okay. Dan, I'm forcing you to agree.
I think he worries about it.
No.
Say yes.
All right. We talked about Taiwan, so we can skip that. All right. Last topic, and then we're going to take your questions again if you want to be in on the conversation on these topics or get a clarification of the color of Dan's blazer, anything.
Okay, here is a U.S. congressman complaining that the term manufacturing is sexist.
Yesterday, I met with a manufacturing company, but they also are engaged in getting young people more engaged in manufacturing. So I asked them, so how many of those students that are signing up and want to do this, how many are women? And they said, well, I know there's at least 13% or something. It was a low number. And you had mentioned trying to engage more women in manufacturing. I'm just wondering if just the name manufacturing sounds like a guy. Yesterday, I met.
So even though most American Jews vote for the Democratic Party, overwhelmingly American Jews dislike affirmative action. They dislike the rich tax policies, and they dislike anti-business legislation.
Okay. I tend to overreact sometimes to trends in politics. And I thought after the election, and frankly, even during the election, that the Democratic Party was in a world of hurt. And then after the election, people calmed me down and said, it's not so bad. Remember what happened to the Democrats after Trump won in 2016. Remember what happened to Republicans after Obama won, and then the rise of the Tea Party. These things are cyclical. I now am of the belief that things are actually really dire for the Democrats. And I see that in just a lot of ways. But let me tell you one way it's manifesting that's making me really rethink the prospect of a legitimate comeback, which is they've lost access to so many things that prop them up as asymmetrical, massive advantages for years. Not lost them completely, but entertainment, news, the academy, social media, like all these things, Silicon Valley fundraising, all these things that were either massive or mega massive advantages are now not, and they're trending the wrong way, and Republicans are on the offense to neutralize those even more. So, Dan, am I right that it's more dire than the conventional wisdom? And there's a bunch of polling that shows the parties just, their image is completely messed up. Am I right that it's more dire than the conventional wisdom, or am I back to overreacting?
I'm going to do a John McLaughlin. Wrong. I think you're overreacting, and I think there's two things. One, I don't know of a party in the minority where the other party has the trifecta that has been on offense or even competitive in the conversation for the first 3 to 6 months of a new administration, let alone the first 3 to 6 weeks. It just does not happen. You don't have the tools. You don't, the electorate just voted for the other side's agenda. They have a honeymoon. Like, I think the earliest a honeymoon has really blown up was probably Obama in April when cap and trade started going down. And it was the first sign of the party was splintering a little bit. But I think everything you mentioned, Mark, some of those groups are members of the incumbent party. So if the Democrats start looking like they're making movement, they will start to hedge again. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, entertainment. The other part of it is we have not relied on those people per se. If you look at the $2 billion that Kamala raised, about 70% of it, 65 or so, was low dollar money. It's the base. That is the secret sauce to the party. It is where Republicans have tried to catch up with us. Trump has been very frustrated that the grassroots on their side have not matched it as much. The base is frustrated, but I don't think money would be a problem for us in the future. I think we have to get messengers and a message, but that is always the case when you lose everything.
I don't agree with that. I think you guys have been defanged. I've never in my lifetime seen an instance. Now, do I think that these tech guys, I think they're completely full of crap, and that the second that the power shifts back, they're going to apologize to your side and say, we only hung out with Trump because we had to. They're full of it. They're transactional. Fine, we'll take them while we can. We can, they can, but I've never seen an instance. I mean, think about this. It was noted last night. Think about on college campuses right now. Throughout Joe Biden's 4 years, people are going nuts on college campuses, and we don't have any of that. There's no passion. Your side doesn't have any sort of sense of fight in it right now, and that's the difference. Is that normally the party loses, and then there's this. Either on our side, it was Tea Party patriots. On your side, Occupy Wall Street, that comes out and says, we got to go out there and make the case. We got to fight. It's like everyone's walking around as Democrats. And as a Republican and a Trump supporter, people walk up to me and was like, hey, man, you guys won. We're just going to sit. I mean, there's no sense of we're going to fight.
I agree.
Totally agree. There never is 3 weeks into, one, The second thing is, look,
dude, it was
there was 8 years ago.
Oh my God! The Washington Post talked about impeaching the guy. There were rallies in the street.
But if I look though at 17 and I look at the last 50 years, that was a one-off. Trump's win was so shocking. And, you know, you had the Russia allegations, he lost the popular vote, like it was another loss of the popular vote after Al Gore. So I agree, it's not 17. But here's the other thing. Trump, like, and Steve said this last night, and I've said it as well, the rubber is going to meet the road on a whole bunch of this stuff. Right now,
100%.
He is the greatest TV producer, political TV producer ever. He is, you know, action and attention and all of this. Prices are either going to start to come down or they're not. The economy is either going to start to get better or it's not. Immigration is either going to, meaning cleaning it up, so to speak, is either going to start to get better or it's not. And by the way, I go back to this, Sean, the White House has stopped putting numbers out. The White House has stopped on immigration. They have stopped putting the images out. Why? Because the amount of people they're getting in totality to the problem is a joke. It is. It's 0.001%. It's better than zero. But my point is, when you have a new administration, it is either just like Trump benefited. Either Biden was going to bring prices down, have a better economy, or people are going to want to change. If this stuff doesn't start to improve, we will have an opportunity. I mean, that's just and
that may be true.
Right.
Yeah, and you're right. If key things don't keep improving. But I was at a MAHA event last night in Washington, D.C. to celebrate what we thought was going to be Bobby's confirmation. Most people in that room, and this was an event that people were paying to come to, were your people. They were donors that you probably hit up, and every one of them. And one guy I talked to had previously worked at the DNC. And I said to him, just out of curiosity, why are you here today? Is it just Bobby? And he said, no, I have 3 daughters. And he goes, and I sat there at one point and watched guys on the field and someone pushed a young girl down on my daughter. And he goes, and I had enough. Your party has gone too far in a lot of issues.
Correct. So let me say 4 things that I think, Dan, run counter to your assumption that it will be not like 17, but be like the other times when a party's lost. First, I'll say I'd be super curious to know how Kamala Harris's fundraising appeals for the DNC are going. I'd like to know how much those are raising. Here are 4 differences. One is we've never had a president as aggressive as Trump. We never have. We've never seen the Democratic Party, at least, be this far to the left. So if you assume, as most people we know do, that there has to be some moderation to get more of the center back, they got a long way to go. 3 is the thing I said before, which is they've lost some fundamental strengths and asymmetrical advantages that they have had for years and years. And 4 is, again, you can tell me about Governor Beshear or Governor Moore, but in every previous cycle, I could tell you the names of people from the losing party who could run for president and would strike some fear in the hearts of the majority party. I cannot name a person like that today. Are they afraid of the governor of Illinois, or of Amy Klobuchar, or of Gavin Newsom, or of Wes Moore, or Governor Beshear? They are not. Maybe they should be, but they're not afraid of any Democrat right now. Not one. To the contrary, they're like, bring them on. We'll run against any of those people, regardless. So again, I don't want to overreact. I don't want to say the Democratic Party's dead. I'm just saying, as I survey the polling data, the fundraising data, and the daily news flow, and I look at the decline. I mean, they had all these corporations so woke that they were adjuncts of the Democratic Party. It's all flipped. It's all flipped. Not 100%, but that's a loss of a big advantage.
Well, but hold on. Those companies, having been a lobbyist for years, those companies are members of the incumbent party. It was cool in 2021 to be doing all of this stuff coming off of George Floyd. It's not cool now. And to Sean's point, if the tides turn, they will all come Mark Zuckerberg will cut his hair, take off the chain and the T-shirt, and put on whatever Democrats are wearing. Maybe it'll be a blue blazer. But I would also just say, Mark, that one thing that, and I agree with you, but I would just put a note of caution. If the playing field is in 4 years what it is today, you're totally right. But historically, after 12 years of a singular person or party dominating, which is essentially, Trump essentially dominated the last 4 years, the national conversation, it is often the case the country begins to want a change in tone, in style, and I mean, the only one who really extended it was FDR in the last 100 years. So if you assume that things will evolve in the next 3 years, who the right candidate is for that moment may be amongst the seven dwarfs, you know, to do the old Lee Atwater.
Okay, fascinating conversation there on Mark Halperin's program this morning. Steve Saylor is out with a new blog post on Anora. So it's a sex comedy. It's the new Oscar frontrunner. And Steve Saylor notes, well, the Academy can't just announce, sorry, there are no worthy movies in 2024. We'll try again next year. So Anora is about a New York stripper whore who marries her richest client, a Russian oligarch's childish heir. And they go get married in Las Vegas, but then the kid, the oligarch's heir, his formidable parents in Moscow hear about it, and they sick their Armenian fixers along with their Russian flathead goon on the stripper to try to threaten her and cajole her into agreeing to annul the marriage. So why not Anora, right? It's not a great movie. It's not a particularly well-crafted movie. It's somewhat repetitious and tiresome. The characters are underwritten, right? Why is the Russian oligarch so rich? And how Russian is the Jewish-looking brunette Anora supposed to be? She says she has a Russian-speaking grandmother. How Jewish is Anora? So who's Mikey Madison? Is he the leading male? Oh, Mikey Madison is the stripper. Okay. So she's 100% Valley Girl Jewish. Right? San Fernando Valley has been filling up with people who are kind of Jewish and kind of Russian. So the atheist Soviet Union discouraged its subjects from religion. But Ms. Madison, in her looks, is all Jewish. She looks like Fran Drescher's homelier little sister. So how much does the new daughter-in-law's apparent Jewishness matter to the Russian parents? All right, interesting question. Doesn't come up in Anora. All right, so much to talk about.
I think it was Lee Atwater in '88 called him the Seven Dwarfs. But, you know, it's dark right now, but I don't think, I think it will get lighter.
Andrew, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're wearing, and what's on your mind.
I have no idea who I'm wearing. I'm from Ohio. I actually had a follow-up on what you guys are kind of talking about here in terms of structural problems for the Democrats, we'll call it. Obviously there's a lot of USAID conversations going around with DOGE, and there's a lot of pieces to what that kind of means downstream. I haven't read everything that's been cut, but it definitely seems to align.
So the best thinker to describe the situation that we are in right now is Clinton Rossiter. He wrote books on the American president. He wrote a book on the American Constitution. And he's probably the best analyst of where we are right now. And if you go on YouTube, right, there is a lecture that he gave back in 1964 at UCLA. So here's a little taste of Mr. Rossiter, and I'm told he's our best guy for understanding our current
tells
moment.
The cast of characters. I'm willing later on to get just as gossipy as you want me to be, but for the moment, at least, I would like to talk about background. And we are already in the midst of some very hot campaigning for
So this is a talk delivered in 1964 at UCLA.
The presidency, the vice presidency, although nobody will admit it, all the seats in the House, 1/3 of the seats in the Senate, and of course many other offices in America. And what I would like to do is to string together some observations, not so much on the men who will or may contest for all these places of power, but on the places themselves, on the present state of the presidency and the House and the Senate, on the relations among these offices, and especially about the position the president has today in law and fact and circumstance and politics in relationship to Congress. In other words, this critical relationship in our constitutional form of government, that between a man named Lyndon B. Johnson and some other men named Mike Mansfield and Everett McKinley Dirksen and Charles Halleck and J. William Fulbright and John McCormick and the rest. There are, I think, things worth knowing, trends that are worth marking for the sake of understanding our democracy, but also because with these things, with these trends in mind, we will be able to make better educated guesses and give a more certain answer to Hamilton's persistent and prophetic question. So let's look together for a while, if I may do it this way, and I don't think anyone's going to stop me, at least not just yet, at the White House and the Capitol and the relations that bring them together, pull them apart, and bring them together again. And what we see as we look at the White House and the Capitol, even though the White House may be dark at the moment and a little bit harder to see, is what we have seen ever since April 30th, 1789, when Washington finally got through the mud from Mount Vernon to New York and was inaugurated president.
So who the heck was Clinton Rossiter, right? American political scientist, born in 1917. He died July 11, 1970, at age 52 by suicide, right? He committed suicide. So he got a PhD for a thesis, Constitutional Dictatorship, Crisis Government in the Modern Democracies, right? 1942. Princeton University awarded him a PhD. He then went on to publish that book. And so that was his first book, came out in 1948, Constitutional Dictatorship, Crisis Government in Modern Democracies. And then he published 1787, The Grand Convention, hailed as among the best accounts of the Federal Convention and the making of the Constitution. So he published a book on conservatism in America, and perhaps his best-known book is The American Presidency, which came out in 1956. But this bloke here, speaking in 1964, he gives a lot of insights into our modern moment.
A pattern that mixes contention with cooperation and conflict with compromise. A pattern that is designed to have both these things in a kind of critical balance. First, let me say a few words about contention, or tension, or conflict, if you will, between President and Congress. That, as we all know, was fixed once and for all, at least for this republic, by the Constitution itself.
So you want to understand about constitutional dictatorship? Clinton Rossiter is the man. So what exactly is the scope of the modern president's dictatorial powers? And over the past 80 years, Congress has increasingly been willing to delegate increasing amounts of power to the presidency in both domestic and foreign affairs. So does the U.S. Constitution impose any significant limits on this delegation? Right, Clinton Rossiter published his book in 1948, building upon his PhD thesis that was presented in 1942. So he analyzed America's constitutional dictatorship of the presidency based on the actions of Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, all right, all of them wartime presidents. And if he were to write a new edition, if he were alive today, right, he could find more than enough material for post-1948 presidents. FDR's successor, Harry Truman, began the use of nuclear weapons in warfare, and he unilaterally ordered the American military to resist the North Korean invasion of South Korea in June 1950. Right? This was the first major war that the United States fought that did not receive the imprimatur of a congressional declaration. So the Truman presidency was a crossing of the Rubicon toward the president's unilateral power to order military force anytime and anywhere in the world. Truman also oversaw the creation of the modern national security state, the featuring of permanent standing armies strewn across the globe, the creation of the CIA with its secret budgets, covert operations, and often tenuous relationship to human rights and the rule of law. And the Truman administration argued vigorously and successfully for the creation of a state secrets privilege, right? A case that rested on a completely mendacious misrepresentation by the United States about its security interests. So the privilege to hide government operations from courts and from the general public as state secrets became an essential tool in the kit of any would-be dictator, and there's no reason to believe that any American president will repudiate it. It's probably even more valuable than the suspension of habeas corpus, which only allows the president to detain specific individuals. So a broad state secrets privilege essentially ensures immunity from judicial scrutiny for a wide swath of cases where the president may plausibly claim that national security requires complete judicial abstention. He does not even have to support the claim with evidence, because that might undermine the security he seeks to maintain. Dwight Eisenhower, American president, built upon President Truman's example. He threatened to use nuclear weapons should an armistice not be reached in Korea. He secretly directed the CIA to overthrow the government of Iran in 1954. He approved the ill-fated invasion of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba that John F. Kennedy pursued shortly after becoming president in 1961. And then the failure of the Bay of Pigs operation led to further secret activities directed against Fidel Castro. And let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was often described as President John Kennedy's finest hour because the U.S. avoided a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. What is overlooked in the dramatic tale surrounding these 13 days of meetings in Washington with Kennedy and his staff is that everyone participated assumed that it was up to the president to decide whether or not to embark on what would have become a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And the exact nature of the Cuban Missile Crisis was hidden from almost everyone in the country.
And whatever else the framers meant to do, they did not mean to make it easy for us to govern ourselves, for the creators and the executors of laws to identify the national goals, to think up policies that would help us to reach these goals, to convert the policies into laws, and then to convert the laws into workable day-to-day administration. They wanted the fragmentation of power, and of course they got it, and we still have it. And the whole idea of contention between two roughly equal and independent bodies is, as we well know, built very firmly and deeply into our system. What we have is essentially a matter of competition between two equal and independent political branches, a competition for the stakes of power. And I would like quickly to review both President and Congress in terms of what I think are perhaps the three most dramatic qualities of an instrument of constitutional government: power, prestige, and independence or freedom of action. I don't think I need to review for this audience the powers of the presidency. We all know how to break it down into various functions or roles. We know what he's called upon to do by the Constitution, by law, by custom. And we know that when we put all the functions of the president together and particularize the total authority he holds in terms of such specific constitutional authority as that to command, to negotiate, to veto, to appoint, to remove, to pardon, and to supervise, and, for example, statutory authority to make budgets, to reduce tariffs, to close banks, to cool off strikes, we have got to conclude that never in history have free men put so much power on a regular day-to-day basis in a single office. We have...
And Paul Gottfried is also an expert on this theme. So here he is speaking a few years ago, Unimagined Power, the Presidency in the History of Political Philosophy.
Legend has it that the U.S. was founded incipiently, if not explicitly, as a presidential government. Whether this tendency was already present in the minds of the founders or whether it emerged as an historical destiny to be ecstatically embraced, an executive regime is what supposedly we were meant to be. An entire school of American historical writing, which has dominated public education since mid-century, elevates presidential powers to the skies. identified with academic celebrities Arthur Schlesinger, Clinton Rossiter, William Leuchtenberg, James M. Burns, and John Morton Blum, among many, many others, this American historiography treats what is best in our past as the work of activist presidents. Individually and collectively, these presidents pushed our country toward what intellectuals wanted it to become, a social democratic experiment bringing the benefits of our reformed society to a still unredeemed world. This mission civilisatrice is essential to presidential government as conceived by mainstream historians, and all of the major conflicts into which our leaders have pushed us from the Civil War on, with the possible exception of the Spanish-American War, are seen as morally desirable actions. Though the Vietnam War occasioned doubts for at least some of these historians, who were never as anti-communist as they were anti-fascist and Teutonophobic, the storyline has remained largely the same. International involvement is mandated by morality and our global position, and only those who suffer from Richard Hofstadter's paranoid style of politics or Joshua Moravcik's isolationist impulse cum anti-Semitism reject America's rendezvous with destiny. In Arthur Schlesinger's scenario, the U.S., as fashioned by Wilson, FDR, and Truman, defines and upholds a vital center, which stands between two ominous extremes, communism and what is generically called the right. The latter is sufficiently sweeping category to take in such a medley of evils as anti-New Deal Republicans, Francisco Franco, and the shattered remnants of Nazi Europe. It would be tedious for me to dwell on this characterization of presidential America for an obvious reason. All of us know what I am characterizing. Most of us have had it drummed into our heads by middle and highbrow culture and by American educational institutions. One does not have to visit Mount Rushmore or look at our coins to get the point. The U.S. is a land of morally driven, energetic presidents who have made us into the envy and dread of the world. They have nudged and sometimes pushed us into assuming international leadership while moving around the furnishings in our own national home. In the extreme example of this thesis put forth by Harry Jaffa and Gary Wills, our greatest president, the Sanctus Omnium Sanctorum, Abraham Lincoln, had to reconstruct our regime and our national purpose to provide us with a second birth in freedom. This is the way these historians understand the Civil War as a bloody rite of passage into a new America dedicated to democratic equality. Such arguments about a presidential America prevail despite a very different founding, one that Mavericks, Emmy Bradford, Murray Rothbard, George W. Carey, and Forrest McDonald have all focused on. These and other scholars bring up the embarrassing fact that the authors of the Constitution and Federalist Papers assumed they were establishing a legislative republic. That it was a legislative republic that would be dominated at the federal level by Congress, not by the president, and certainly not by what is the weakest of the three branches, in Hamilton's phrase, the Supreme Court. The preeminence of a legislative seemed inevitable in a republic, and the founders devoted more attention to that body than to any other branch of government, discussing its power and their limits in Article 1 of the Constitution. The assignment of a president...
Interesting to hear the framers described as regarding the Supreme Court in specific and the judiciary in general as the weakest of the three branches. The U.S. Supreme Court is the most powerful court in the world. The United States Senate is the most powerful upper house in the world, not just in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense. Right? The U.S. Supreme Court has more power than any other Supreme Court equivalent in the world, right? Power over what's going on internally within the United States. And the United States Senate has more power than any other upper house anywhere in the world. So the way the U.S. political system works is that the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate have approximately equal amounts of power. Pretty much everywhere else in the world, the equivalent of the House of Representatives, a parliament, has vastly, vastly, vastly more power than an upper house, a U.S. Senate.
Presidential veto in Article 2 was not intended to allow the president to push around Congress, but as indicated in Federalist 51, was thought necessary, quote, to allow him to defend himself. The need for such a defense is undeniable, explains Publius, quote, in a purely Republican regime in which the tendency of the legislature to overwhelm the other branches of government is almost irresistible, unquote. In such situations, representatives, quote, appear disposed to assert an imperious control over the other departments. And as they commonly have the people on their side, they act with such momentum as to make it very difficult for the other members of the government to maintain the balance of the Constitution, unquote. Not belief in a necessary and salutary executive supremacy, but to the contrary, a very different assumption, namely that presidents would be irreparably weak in Republican governments, caused the founders to assign countervailing powers to the executive in dealing with Congress. A more considered defense of a more considered defense, rather, of the American executive power made by Straussian authors Martin Diamond, Harvey Mansfield, and others, is that presidential government, though not mandated by the American Revolution and certainly not by the Constitution, came along in the course of time, and that was a good thing. That turn has contributed to a more just society and to a more peaceful and more democratic world wherever American influence has been brought to bear. Such a defense typically cites all the happy outcomes attributable to presidential energy: the emancipation of slaves, the victory of democracy in the 2 world wars, civil rights enforcement, New Deal initiatives. Without strong executives at the right moment, we are made to think, American democracy and democracy in general would not have prevailed. It is fairly predictable what old Republican critics of such a view would respond. In fact, the tracks of Rothbard, Rockwell, Raimondo, Knock, H.L. Mencken all serve as illustrations. To wit, overarching executive power has made a mockery of the rule of law, that Caesarism by any other name tramples on Republican liberties, that if the U.S. had stayed out of the First World War, as John Denson points out, had not lied its way into it, the European powers might have been forced to make a peace without conquest. Moreover, continues this rejoinder, Lincoln's war against the South's constitutionally defensible, albeit imprudent secession, cost the American people over 600,000 lives, as well as the end of the old republic. But despite the fact that these respondents would differ in their judgment from the promoters of executive energy, they would all agree on the general picture of what has happened.
So Vice President J.D. Vance is playing the long game, argues a Republican pollster in the New York Times. And when J.D. Vance was picked, he rolled out to the worst reception for any vice presidential candidate by a major American political party in memory. But he showed his competence and his brilliance as the campaign moved on. And then he absolutely demolished Tim Walz in the vice presidential debate. There is a movie about him on Netflix, Hillbilly Elegy, right? He wrote a best-selling memoir. He's only 40 years of age. He appears to have a lovely family. He has a formidable wife. He has adorable children. And he is a thoughtful man, right? He is more skeptical of the value of sending American blood and treasure abroad. And so his views align closely with young Republicans. He understands economics in a populist way, right? He is not all in on the virtues of free and unfettered capitalism. He takes workers' rights seriously. He looks skeptically at elites of all kinds, right? J.D. Vance embraces many parts of the Trumpian agenda that other Republican leaders do not. Right. He has a solid standing among Republican voters. 85% of Republicans hold a favorable view of J.D. Vance. This is true for Trump First Republicans and Party First Republicans. Republicans do not have a robust modern record of vice presidents becoming their party's presidential nominee. But J.D. Vance is in an excellent position, right? Because he is better aligned with the spirit of what most Republicans want. He displays what Trump's core supporters love. He has a thirst for combat. He's indifferent to criticism. He has a populist posture. And he has the ability to learn, to evolve, and to focus.
Both sides look at the rise of presidential power as the major political change since the Civil War, and even more since the Progressive Era. Both stress that the consolidation of presidential power took place at the expense of Congress, after a long struggle for federal control between the two branches. One might also perceive an overlap in the way the two sides trace presidential ascendancy, from Hamilton's establishment of the central state with centralized banking and a monarchical president, through Lincoln's seizure of despotic or dictatorial power, down to the activist, interventionist executives of this century. Though most in this room would disagree with the triumphalist depiction of the process, they would accept the evolutionary course it highlights. That is, from congressional republic to presidential empire.
So people on the left love presidential power when it achieves left-wing goals. So it's not just strictly partisan. People on the left appreciate that Richard Nixon started the Environmental Protection Agency, that Richard Nixon started affirmative action, right? People on the left appreciate many things that Richard Nixon did. But now people on the left are horrified to find out that this incredibly powerful presidency that they played a huge role in creating is now actively working against them in ways that are causing them great distress. This is Masha Gessen talking with Patrick Healy of the New York Times. Both people are on the left.
So I think there are two reasons. To stand up to an attack, you have to have language and ideas to counter the attack. And that language and those ideas on any kind of scale would have come from the Democratic presidential campaign, which they didn't. The Democrats had chosen consciously not to engage with Trump's anti-trans baiting. Somehow, I don't know, willing it away or thinking that if they don't say anything too pro-trans, it will go unnoticed that he is trans baiting them. A strategy that has never worked for anybody in the history of politics, but that Democrats keep stepping into over and over again. So I think that for people to sort of stand up, they needed the words. The way that people reacted so quickly during his last presidency to the travel ban, because we have the language to stand up for immigrants. Yes. We have the ideas to stand up for immigrants. And I think with trans issues, it's much trickier. Most people don't have the language on hand at all. And the other reason, the reason that hospitals, schools, other helping professions aren't standing up for trans people is because they are negotiating this thing, which is what I wrote about. I wrote about this idea of obeying in advance. And it's not a new term. It's actually anticipatory obedience is something that Germans were talking about back in Nazi Germany, and then Sovietologists talked about when they wrote about the Soviet Union. But in this country, Tim Snyder, the Yale historian, popularized it in his 2017 book, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, in which he wrote lesson number 1, do not obey in advance. But what I think he didn't mention is that people obey in advance for very good reasons. And often they obey in advance in accordance with their values. So, for example, I spoke to a doctor or a healthcare provider who works with a lot of both trans and immigrant patients and a lot of undocumented trans patients, right? And this provider said to me, I'm not going to talk to you on the record because I don't want to draw any attention to myself, because I want to be able to provide care for as long as possible. So that's a perfectly clear example for you of somebody making a humane and rational decision perfectly consistent with their decades of medical practice and decades of service that, on the whole, politically detracts from our possibilities.
I think these early weeks of the Trump administration, Masha, are so crucial. In political coverage, we talk about the first 100 days. But this first 100 days feels like nothing we've seen before. He is setting the stage for what you just talked about, for years, if not decades, of a redefined America in which the consensus, not everyone, but the majority consensus shifts toward one direction, where things that were seen as in anywhere from bad taste to being a violation of norms and values and standards somehow becomes either acceptable or at least let's talk about it. Let's talk more about this. The normalization, it's all happening right now in front of us. Have you experienced anything like this before in your coverage of Russia or Eastern Europe, where it feels like we are literally in this moment, and every day that goes by where that language does not exist, that people don't have an ability to call this out or talk about it or make these rationalized choices, time runs out. It's too late eventually.
Well, I definitely feel like I've experienced it. I haven't experienced it at this whiplash speed, right? I mean, this is really, I don't know if it's happened elsewhere in the world. It certainly has not happened in any part of the world that I have covered. But even when Putin came to power in Russia in 99, 2000, right, it was sort of, first he was prime minister, then he was president. And then when he was finally inaugurated as president, it did, at the time, I had no other frame of reference, it felt pretty fast. Right? Because he immediately unleashed an attack on media, immediately unleashed an attack on business or trying to get the oligarchs to line up. And I felt like I was...
Okay, so what these leftists regard as an attack, all right, Trump supporters would see as a defense. So when it comes to war, either literal military war or war in terms of political power, not necessarily huge distinctions between defense and attack. So
living in a chessboard and somebody was picking off pieces and I couldn't predict which piece was going to get picked off next. It felt like I would turn around to say something to somebody and they'd be like, oh, but I support him now. Or, oh, but we can't run that article because of all the good reasons. But in this country, it's faster and it's worse. I mean, we saw the big money line up and genuflect before the inauguration.
They were all going down to Mar-a-Lago, $1 million check, $1 million check, $1 million check. The auto companies giving fleets of vehicles.
Just falling all over themselves to be first in line to obey. And I think that those things are also done for very good reasons. And even there, I think you can probably...
So what Mark Halperin was talking about, the dire shape of the Trump resistance, the dire shape of the Democratic Party, is being repeated here by two people on the left.
See some kind of values that people are relying on, that they have a responsibility to their shareholders, they have a responsibility to their employees. Trump has said what he was going to, what the kind of pressure that he was going to.
So for most people, most of the time, living on your values is a luxury. For most people, when self-interest clashes with their professed values, self-interest is going to win out every time. If you bet against people pursuing their self-interest, right, you will lose most of those bets.
To exert on business, so they should get in his good graces ahead of time for the sake.
It's just incredibly naive to expect that people will act against their self-interest, right? Currently, what's aligned in reality is very much in Donald Trump's favor.
Of, again, other people. The problem is that, I watched a lot of very, very wealthy people try to play that game in Russia. And the regime is insatiable.
Yes.
You have to keep giving it more money. You have to keep ceding more power. And most people I know who fell in line are no longer...
Okay, it's not something unique to Russia that its regime is insatiable. Right? Human beings are insatiable. Right? We want what we want, and we want as much of what we want as possible. And if things are aligned in Donald Trump's favor, you would expect him to act in his own self-interest and to take as much as he can, including Greenland, including Canada, including the Panama Canal, including Gaza.
Living in Russia, despite all of their compromises. And those who are living in Russia, I think maybe wish that they weren't, but they have no choice.
And Masha, that's the thing. The autocrat always knows when he has people just where he wants them. Every time someone rolls over or bends the...
It's not just the autocrat. We all know when we've got someone where we want them. We all tend to press our own advantage. Right? This is not something unique to dictators. It's not something unique to autocrats. It's not something unique to bad people. Right? Good people do the same thing. Right? When I made it easy for people to bully me, right? When I acted in a way that presented myself as vulnerable, right? I encouraged bullying. When I was weak, people bullied me. When I had a formidable weapon at my disposal, my blog, people stopped bullying me. As soon as my blog became powerful, no more bullying directed my way. So Donald Trump, autocrats, dictators, Russians, they are not exceptions to the human condition.
You can just imagine Donald Trump looking at them and saying, got him, got him, got her, got him. He would sort of pick and choose people based on really this kind of Trumpian genius for understanding human behavior and the way that people roll.
So I don't like many of Trump's nominees, particularly the ones for health. but I like seeing Trump rack up wins because overall, Donald Trump is very much aligned with my understanding of reality. So I love seeing Trump rack up wins, even when that means the confirmation of people who I think are ludicrous choices.
And I think especially understanding the way that so many human beings obey and respond and rationalize against power. Most human beings don't have this kind of power that a Donald Trump or an autocrat has, and he has some sense of that, some understanding. And you wrote about particularly two ways of thinking about this that I thought were so important in thinking about this moment. And it's kind of the pragmatic argument for obeying and the zeitgeist argument for obeying.
So, Masha Gessen, you may not like her, you may not like her looks, you may not like her politics, but she is frequently incredibly honest. And I commend her honesty and the clarity that she often brings, even if I disagree with her liberal left hero system.
And what it comes down to is when we are living in Trump's America, so many people will take the pragmatic approach and the zeitgeist moment that this is what society is like today. And I keep coming back to the idea of why do people, including very quote unquote smart people, just sort of shrug and go along to get along when they must know that doing so puts them, if not in Trump's pocket, at least.
So I remember living in Barack Obama's America, 2008, 2009, early 2010. We were living in Barack Obama's America. So why would people on the right not rejoice at what they feel like is the return of their country to them? That the levers of power are no longer being actively pushed against them.
At least makes him know that he has the upper hand.
That's such a great question. So when you were talking about how Trump uses his particular genius to get people where he wants them, I felt a desire to object. You know, I don't want to think of him as a psychological genius. He is kind of a one-trick pony when it comes to people, right? He thrives on humiliation and he rewards loyalty. His assumption is that everybody is basically exactly like him. So you see it backfire sometimes when, for example, he says to Putin, you know, come on, stop the stupid war. You're losing more than you stand to gain, without realizing that Putin actually is not like him. In some significant ways he is, in some significant ways he is not, but the logic is not going to work because Trump doesn't understand what Putin is after. But a lot of people, as it turns out, are a lot like Donald Trump. They think they're much smarter than they are. So they think that even though they're giving in to Trump, they are somehow going to engineer this whole situation in a way that will allow them to avoid the fate of all the idiots who are genuflecting to Donald Trump. And I think that's where he really thrives, right, is in dealing with people who are reasoning exactly the way that he reasons. And he objectively has a lot more power than they do, and they're going to lose.
Masha, so many people in politics and government think of themselves as playing the long game. And so when we think about the pragmatic argument for obeying in advance, I just want to drill down on one example, which is PBS recently announced that they were closing their DEI office so as not to lose federal funding. And you have to wonder, and now maybe I'm playing into the obey in advance, if the closing of the DEI office is just a step, an effort to survive at all, isn't PBS, the greater good of keeping PBS around, worth it? You know, maybe the country is better with public broadcasting in some form. So the DEI office, you know, can go now, could reopen in 5 or 10 years. What's the counter to that?
Well, tell me honestly, do you think PBS is going to exist in 3 years?
I do. I do, but I'm not sure about the NewsHour. I'm not sure about that.
Right. I think that if we get a little bit of distance from this, right, and try to sort of reason through it, as you said, PBS is in the crosshairs of this administration. do we really think that abolishing DEI is going to get them out of the crosshairs?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are they actually going to have to give in order to stay afloat? I think they're going to have to have Ron DeSantis run PBS or something like that. That's the only thing that could possibly keep them alive. And so if we know that, then that small indignity, which is what it probably feels like to them, right? The small indignity of abolishing the DEI office and probably reassuring the employees, which is what everybody is doing, and sort of saying, we're not going to.
So from my right-wing perspective, this is all glorious. This is all great. This is just another reason to feel euphoric right now.
Be worse for it. We're just giving them a little, but they're going to have to give a lot more, especially those organizations that, like PBS, are already targeted. And I think we're all in a prisoner's dilemma. And basically, unless we start acting collectively, and by we, I mean the most expansive we possible of us who don't want to live in Trump's autocracy, then we're just going to be making life worse for one another with every concession. And who, if not organizations like PBS, which actually have a megaphone, would lead the charge for not conceding, for not obeying?
You really make a case for collective action, because it feels like you over there, you give an inch, Trump will take a mile. You over there, you give an inch, Trump will take a mile, and over and over and over again. The question is, for most Americans, the way that they have thought about success and survival in this.
So often it's useful to look at how does the opposite sex operate. So women are much more responsive to social cues. They have less courage than men. They are more vulnerable. And so think about female sexuality on college campuses. On those college campuses where there is the highest percentage of women, the lowest percentage of men, so that the women have to compete to land a boyfriend, right? Women are willing to do all sorts of sexual things that they would not otherwise do. Right? Women much more willing to be promiscuous. They are willing to be extreme in the sex acts that they perform. They are willing to go to much greater lengths to obtain a man and to secure a man. In the opposite situation, where there is a high percentage of men and a low percentage of women, then women hold out much more on extending sex. They are much more hesitant to engage in extreme sex. So depending on the situation, right, people are going to act differently depending on the incentives. And so Trump seems to understand the levers of power in America right now. And so he's acting in unprecedented ways.
Society, so much of it has been about pick your battles, live to fight another day. It's really the individual who I can count on as opposed to a collective society. And that, I feel like, is kind of a struggle. And Trump realizes in some ways we don't have the time to change our mindset as Americans.
I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a pretty convenient country to pick for building an autocracy. We don't have a culture of collective action. We no longer have local media. I mean, we're not equipped to stand up to this. Some extraordinary leadership and some extraordinary organizing efforts really, really soon would be needed to stave this off.
Masha, let's dig down more into that point about opposition and resistance. You know, it's been less than a month since Trump's inauguration, and some Democrats, they're still scrambling and trying to figure out and talking about finding ways to deal with Trump, including working with Trump, you know, in those first couple of weeks especially.
So the world doesn't always go our way. Sometimes other people have much more power over us than we would like. Sometimes our most precious relationships are threatened. So how do we hold on to ourselves during difficult times? How do we become internally motivated rather than relying on things outside of ourselves to keep us together? Right? This is psychologist and author Alan Berger.
But here's the goal in emotional sobriety. The aim of life and the aim of emotional sobriety is to live it intensely, to live your life intensely, to be fully born, we talked about before that the first insight into emotional sobriety is waking up, being born again, coming out of your sleep, breaking the trance that you've been involved. Gurdjieff said that we're all, asleep, dreaming that we're awake. Well, we need to wake up. We need to get born again. We need to emerge from the ideas of an infantile grandiosity. Well, what is that? Well, that it's all about me. That it's me, 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 me. Everything you're doing it because of me. We take it all personally. We start to emerge. We transcend this idea of an infantile grandiosity into the conviction of one's real strength. One's real strength lies in the ability to support yourself, to be able to take care of yourself. And that's what autonomy in a relationship is all about. This is Dr. Nathaniel Branden. I love the way he says this. He goes, no one can always give us what we want. Darn it. You get to say darn it after I read stuff like that, right? Let yourself have a reaction to it. No one can always give us what we want. No one can always respond to us the way we would like and just at the moment we'd like. No one else exists for the satisfaction of our desires. Marriage is not a contract to commit yourself to satisfying the other person's desires. It's a contract to enjoy each other and inspire each other, not to take care of each other in that way. No one exists for the satisfaction of our desires. And if we attempt to manipulate someone into this role, either by playing for sympathy or by playing for guilt, all we will succeed in doing in the end is to stimulate resentment, regardless of whether or not our partner is maneuvered into complying with our immediate request. Bill Wilson said it in the big book. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. This is my good friend John Amadeo. He's got a great book out called The Authentic Heart. He goes, connecting to your longing delivers you to a vulnerable edge of being ready for love. But if you confuse this loving for love or this longing for love itself, you're setting yourself up for a relationship based on dependency, not love. I mean, take that in for a minute. If you confuse the longing for your connection as love, then you're setting yourself up for dependency. This is Doctors Miriam and Irving Polster, may they rest in peace. They had this brilliant insight. They said, if our freedom depends exclusively on another person allowing it, then we lose our own sense of the part we must exercise in protecting and defining our own psychological space. If our freedom depends exclusively on another person allowing it. See, a lot of people go into a relationship and they say, well, you're not letting me express my feelings. Right? As though father may I or mother may I. It doesn't work that way. You need to express your feelings, whether or not that person is going to give you permission to do it. And then this is what evokes anxiety. Oh my God, if I say what I really feel, they may not love me. If I don't say what I feel, then I may not love them. Oh my God, what a dilemma. So now let's look at what autonomy looks like. And we're going to rely on Brandon's insights to talk about this. So autonomous individuals, these are individuals that hold on to themselves in relationships, understand that other individuals do not merely exist to satisfy their needs. Judy, I want you to write that down. Write it down, Judy. I want to see you write it down. Autonomous individuals understand that other individuals do not merely exist to satisfy any need. They've accepted the fact that no matter how much love and caring exists between persons, we are each of us, in the ultimate sense, responsible for ourselves.
So different communities, different people have different ideas about individual rights versus the rights of the community, and a terrific TV show to understand a more communal, more family-based approach to life is on Netflix. It's called Asura, A-S-U-R-A. It's about the relationship between 4 Japanese sisters, I think primarily in the years 1979 and 1980. So Japan has incredible levels of social cohesion and social trust. I just admire the way that so many East Asians respect their elders, that they regard looking after their aging parents as a privilege, the way that they sacrifice for their families. So the autonomous way is not the only way, right? Some people are better off being a little less autonomous and a little more connected. And if you want to understand how a more connected, more family-oriented perspective on life, what that looks like, check out Asura, A-S-U-R-A. It is on Netflix. And read all of Nathaniel Branden. He's terrific.
Autonomous individuals have grown beyond the point that they need to prove to anyone that they are a good boy or a good girl. Just as they have outgrown the need for their spouse or romantic partner also to be their mother or their father. Now, sometimes this happens in every relationship, but when it becomes habitual, when you are configured this way, where you're the child and they're the parent, big trouble. Big trouble in Little China. So when you have, and see, I hope you can see that what he's also talking about here is to have autonomy means that I have self-esteem. When my self-esteem is self-validated self-esteem, then I don't have to turn to you to prove to you I'm a good boy or that I'm not a bad boy. I validate myself. I don't need your validation. I become the arbiter of my behavior and the monitor of my behavior. I don't need you to pressure me to change. When I am going to grow up in the sense that he's talking about, I take the initiative to clean up the behaviors on my behaviors that are not helpful to me or the relationship. I don't need you to pressure me and point out what I'm not doing to be a better partner. I pay attention to that. Just like if I see the garbage filled, I don't need, my partner to tell me, hey, it's time to throw out the garbage. I got eyes. I've got a nose. I can smell that it's time. I don't need somebody else. I don't need mommy to tell me that. So I participate fully in my life and take responsibility for showing up the way I want to show up, regardless. Listen to what I'm going to say, because this is a tough pill to swallow, regardless of whether or not my partner is doing the same thing. You see, the interdependence creates a I'll show you mine if you show me yours, or a tit-for-tat mentality. If you do right, I'll do right. If you act like a shit, I'll act like a shit. Well, that's not autonomy. That's what little kids do. What?
So the people we form relationships with are almost always a reflection of us, right? It's impossible to date anyone for long, to relate to someone for long who's dramatically more or dramatically less mature than you are, right? The people that we bring into our lives are a reflection of us, and yet in almost every relationship, it sure feels like each person regards themselves as so much more mature than their partners. But no, you're always going to be on approximately the same level of maturity. One person, say, may be more mature and adult in matters of finances. The other person may be more mature and adult in matters of, say, sexual fidelity. But overall, you're going to be pretty close to a mirror.
Why did you hit Johnny? He hit me first. Oh, my God. That's right. You're clean. He hit you first. It's all right.
Who hit who first is incredibly important most of the time. That does matter. Kids are right. It matters who hit who first. Right? So I don't agree with Alan Berger denigrating that question, denigrating that statement.
Wipe out little Johnny. You're justified. When we grow up, we don't do that. We don't play tit for tat anymore. I take responsibility for who I am and what I'm doing, regardless of what somebody else is doing. Autonomous individuals are ready for romantic love because they've grown up. Because they do not experience themselves as waifs who need to be saved or rescued. They do not require any.
So frustrations in my love life, it's easy for me when I'm frustrated with that to focus on why aren't I getting what I want with my love life. But my love life is just a symptom, right? Almost all of our problems, say underrunning, right? It's a symptom of a deeper issue of not getting on the same page with other people and not stepping up to one's adult responsibilities.
Anyone's permission to be who they are, and their egos are not continually on the line. You see, when I'm emotionally dependent, then every interaction with someone that's important to me, there's so much at stake. Are they going to love me? Are they going to respond the way I want them to? Are they going to make me feel good? My existence is always on the line. When I start to stand on my own two emotional feet, I'm not looking for you.
So one reason that Kip and I have a pretty good relationship is that neither depends on the other person, right? It doesn't matter to me if I make a critique that hurts Kip's feelings. I would hope it doesn't matter to Kip if he makes a critique that hurts my feelings. I'm not asking Kip to tell me, oh, that was a great show, right? If Kip doesn't, say, comment on a particular show, my happiness level is not reduced. If Kip praises a particular show, my happiness level goes up a tiny amount. If Kip denigrates a particular segment or a particular show, my happiness level may drop a tiny, tiny amount, but neither of us are depending on the other person. I don't feel like I need to hold back when I'm talking to Kip or talking at Kip or talking about Kip for the sake of his feelings, all right? Kip is a grown-ass man. He stands on his own 2 feet.
To take care of me, or to validate my existence, or to approve of me? I don't need that. Yeah, if you like me, I won't take that personally. If you don't, I won't take that personally. You see, I have autonomy. I don't get lost in all of that stuff. An autonomous individual is one who does not experience his or her self-esteem continuing in question or jeopardy.
So Kip says, I need a critique from time to time. We all need a critique, all right? Accurate criticism benefits all of us, all right? Getting different perspectives on things is a benefit to all of us.
His or her worth is not a matter of continuing doubt. The source of approval resides within the self. It is not at the mercy of every encounter with another person.
So when I was younger, right, my sense of self, my sense of worth, how I felt about myself just was always just ricocheting up and down, just dramatic swings, right, from grandiosity to a sense of defeat, doom, and gloom. And now pretty much feel the same way. You know, there are blips up and down, but overwhelmingly, I like myself. Overwhelmingly, each day I've constructed a life where I'm either okay or I feel good about every decision, every action that I've made, or pretty close to it. So that's been one of the great things of moving through my 50s that was not there before. And in large part, I owe it to the teachings of Alan Berger and Herb Kay and my various 12-step mentors.
If I do not feel lovable, then it's very difficult for me to believe that anyone else loves me. And what happens is then this becomes now the compulsion, the driving force to get the person to prove that they love you. So now you test that person at every twist and turn to see if they really love you or not. And there's all kinds of ways. There's subtle ways we do that. Honey, do you think my ass is too big? Oh my God. You know, or things like, God, you know, why have you stayed with me this long?
All right, it's not just that we test each other. We're constantly deliberately hurting each other, right? It's called normal marital sadism, but you can extend it to your other relationships, right? We're constantly pick at our friends, niggle with our friends. We tap on their weak points, right? And if you're unaware of this, if you deny this, it just shows that you're in denial of reality. There's normal marital sadism. There's normal levels of friendship sadism. There are normal levels of sadism within a family. And then there are abnormal levels where people commit crimes and acts of tremendous violence.
Can you tell me why you love me? You see, our insecurity looks for reassurance left and right in our relationships. And what happens? Now I'm asking that person to take care of me. And if they fall into the trap.
Look, I used to think that 12-step programs, anything like Alexander Technique, any self-esteem talk, these were just the gayest, most useless perspectives ever. And then I just became open to trying them, didn't need to believe in them to try them. And as I tried them, they became self-validating. And letting go of my habitual responses just so happened to coincide with letting go of unnecessary layers of muscular tension, right? As you let go of your physical armoring of unnecessary muscular tension, you'll also let go of your mental armoring of unnecessary resistance to reality.
Instead of pointing out to us, are you aware of what you're setting up with me right now? And talking to you about that, then you guys are off to the races. And it's what happens a lot, because if someone cares about us, they want us to feel good. And then they go ahead and say, okay, I'll take on the responsibility of your feelings. Oh boy, that's the kiss of death. I'll be responsible for you, Julia. No matter what you feel, it's my job to make sure that you're okay and that your life is going to be fine. Good luck, Alan. Good luck.
So a great way of getting out of reflexive idea deflection and becoming more open to the world around you is to let go of unnecessary muscular hoarding patterns, such as we see
which
here.
is certainly what it's doing now. And then you've got a lovely breath. By a lovely breath, I mean what Alexander called full capacity breathing, where natural breathing, it's where the lungs are getting air down to the bases of the lungs. It's not just upper respiratory, panic attack type, nervous situations. We can always come back to the inhibition of Alexander's lessons, learning to stop the automatic response to a stimulus. And we have the guidelines, lovely little guidelines. Allow neck to be free, the head to balance up, which it is. Your torso's lengthening, softening and widening. All that is taking place. So why should that be disturbed? Simply because you bounce out of a chair. We just do it unconsciously. Up goes the chin, crunch goes the head, and we stand up all day long. Terrible, terrible compression unconsciously. With this work, you're not doing that, so this becomes so strong and very flexible, and you become free of a lot of harmful habits. For me to help you, or to help you get that experience, we'll just stand up. To allow now to before we stand up, it's an idea to bring the feet underneath you just a little bit more, and then we just wait, come quiet, not getting ready to push, because I don't.
So it was after a year and a half of daily Alexander technique training that one Friday I said, for the first time I ever uttered this phrase, I'm going to go home and be gentle with myself this weekend. My therapist for years would urge me to be a good friend to myself, and I was never able to understand what that meant experientially until I let go of significant amounts of muscular tension. So where you are with how you hold yourself, with your body, with your physiology, with your layers of muscular tension, all right, that has a profound effect on your emotions and your thinking, all right? If you're stiff and awkward in your body, you're going to be stiff and awkward with your emotions, your emotional expression, and with your thinking, right? If you're free and open with your thinking, you're much more likely to be free and open with your emotion and with your body, right? What goes on in the mind, right? Inflexible habits of thinking will lead to inflexible habits of holding onto yourself and a lack of flexibility with regard to emotions. So freedom in the mind leads to freedom in the body, freedom with one's emotions, right? Access to one's emotions will provide greater access to your physical and cognitive capabilities. And after 2 years and 3 months of Alexander technique teacher training on a near daily basis, that's when I first became open to going to a 12-step program for sex addiction, right? Had to let go of all this muscular hoarding patterns, all this denial, all right, all this idea deflection that I'd carried with me through life. And then I became open to new ways of doing things. And physical openness tends to correlate with emotional and cognitive openness.
I want the attention to the legs. That's your stand. It's already in the brain mechanisms that you're about to stand. We don't have to do any more than that. It's there. What we do have to do is prevent the head, the habit. Allow neck to be free, head to balance. Beautiful. And then I know, watch the chin. That's going to work. A little bit of arms coming forward.
So when God tells the Israelites in the Torah, you're a stiff-necked people, that's not a compliment. When your neck is stiff, when your neck is compressed, when your neck is tight, that sends layers of compression and stiffness and tightness throughout your body, because there are more joints in your neck than anywhere else in your body. A joint means one bone connecting with another bone, So your neck is tight, your whole body is going to be tight. Right? Your physical movement, your thinking, your emotions are all going to be restricted.
But that's all right. We gently let the head float up again. Yes, 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 yes. And up you go. Lovely. Strengthening, letting the back lengthen. Torso to soften and widen. And widen. Beautiful. Just quiet. Yes. Nice. See, you're not trying to breathe there, it's just happening. Quite naturally and quite deeply.
So, unlike with yoga and many other systems, you don't manipulate the breath in Alexander technique. You try to reduce the artificial hindrances that you have created through a force of habit of unnecessary muscular tension that get in the way of your proper functioning.
That's very nice. To sit down. It's not about sitting and standing, really. It's about looking after this.
So you can teach the Alexander technique just bringing someone in and out of a chair, right? The challenge of locking and unlocking your limbs to get in and out of a chair will likely reveal almost all of your muscular tension patterns, and the same muscular tension patterns, the same interfering compression patterns that you demonstrate getting in and out of a chair, you're using them throughout your life with a stimulus such as being yelled at work, when you're chopping vegetables, when you're working out, right? Those same muscular tension patterns will reoccur. And so if you can become aware of these unnecessary muscular holding patterns, right, just getting in and out of a chair, you can then apply that understanding throughout your life.
Neck is free, head balancing up. Let me move you. You're going to send the knees just that way. Free neck, head balancing up. What 2 seconds? That was sort of going down. I want you to think like a kite. Your head's follow my other direction.
So virtually everybody over the age of 20, when they simply think about sitting down, when they are a few steps away from sitting down in a chair, you'll notice that they're already tightening, they're already compressing, they're already collapsing down. Right? Just thinking about sitting in a chair. And when I work with Alexander Technique students and I get them to tell themselves, I'm not standing up, I'm not standing up, I'm not standing up. And when they finally believe I'm not standing up, then just pop up. And if you don't think about it, you get to bypass your habits and your movement will be much more graceful. So if you go for a walk and you tell yourself, I'm not walking, and you believe it, right, your movement, your walk will become much more graceful and efficient. So most of our habits with regard to movement, with how we hold on to ourselves, with regard to muscular tension, how we do things, do not serve us. Right? We're better off bypassing our habits. Now, it's not easy because we know ourselves by our layers of unnecessary muscular tension. And so you have an Alexander Technique lesson, you suddenly let go of an enormous amount of muscular tension, and it can be bewildering. It's like, who am I? Right? The things that you once loved, say playing football, you may no longer love. You may want to engage in different activities, be a different person. You are a whole new person when you let go of these layers of unnecessary tension.
There's a little guiding direction in my hands. So I want you to, like a kite, to think up, and your spine is going to be the tail of the kite floating up and not sticking them. The bottom doesn't have to stick out. It's the knees that float as they just bend. But neck free, head forward, and then you just bend your knees quite quickly. That's it. And then to stand, we go no, quiet, neck free, stay back in your back, and up to go up.
So the reason that we say no to habitual ways of doing things is that they don't serve us. So inhibition means saying no to our habitual responses if those habitual responses do not serve you. So the way I define the Alexander Technique is it's a way of noticing how one responds to stimuli and then letting go of those responses that don't serve you, such as unnecessary muscular tension and compression.
And then we wait. Soft legs, even if we just flash on all the areas, allowing neck to be free, head to balance up.
So if I just stand here and look out the window and expand my field of awareness, you'll see a reduction of tension in my face and a little bit more upward direction. When we're in a state of awareness, there's more upward direction, as opposed to being in a state of judgment. As soon as you think thoughts, as soon as you're making judgments, right, you'll start to tighten and compress. And there's a time and a place for thinking and making judgments, but there's also a time and a place for resetting. And when I make a decision right now, I'm going to just let go of everything that I think I know. And as I do that, my breath comes more easily. I notice that my back lengthens and widens. There's upward direction flowing through my body. My face is relieved of unnecessary tension, compression, and wrinkle patterns. And just being in this expanded state of awareness is a pretty damn good place to be. When you're in the present moment, right, you'll tend to have much less tension and compression and pulling down than when you're fearing the future or regretting the past, right? When you're in the present moment, you will operate more effectively and smoothly, as opposed to when you're thinking about the past or